Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. So, yesterday we watched a couple videos by Acer Aesthetics about the lore of Demon Souls, like a very straightforward story recap, and then another one by Soul Porpoise about saying goodbye to Souls games and more or less talking about how Dark Souls 1 is a Metroidvania and Elden Ring is kind of taking a departure from the earlier formula of those kind of games, I guess. It was very entertaining. We had a lot of good discussion result of that. So today I'm going to begin a video that has been on the playlist for a while and I just haven't gotten around to it because honestly it's extremely long. So I figured why not do it today and just break it up in parts, because even if I did like take part of a weekend and did like a longer stream, I almost feel like it would be almost an 8-hour stream or 7-hour stream, which is just kind of a lot to do all at once. So it kind of makes more sense to me to break this one up maybe in 2 or 3 installments, something along those lines. So that's kind of on tap for today. The Empyreans Order and the Universe Explained video by TLGTW. I don't actually know what that stands for. Every time I see it, I'm just like, the lizard, gizzard, the wizard. So maybe they will let us know what that means in the video. So yeah, everybody, welcome on in. It's nice to have you again. Ask Next, Billy Caldwell, Mercy, Elden Enthusiast, Jube. You've been waiting for this critique for a while? It's a long vid, yeah. Yeah, so figure, why not just break it up? Okay, so enough stalling for time to get some more people back into the stream. We're just going to go ahead and dive on in. And I haven't watched anything by them, so I'm curious as to how this is going to go. And with this topic being about Empyreans, it's one that just kind of comes up all the time in discussions about the lore of Elden Ring. So I'm a little bit skeptical about like how much can really be said without like tying it into... Sorry, that's my fault. Without tying it into like outside sources. So hopefully we'll get a better understanding and hopefully it'll be grounded. But if they do go off into like the more esoteric stuff, that's all fine too. Okay. Yeah, it's 4 hours. All right, everybody. Empyreans Order and the Universe Explained by TLGTW.
Beginning disclaimer. This video has spoilers for everything in Elden Ring. It assumes you are aware of every level and major boss, and are aware of all 3 endings and their associated questlines. This video is also not structured with a predisposition of being accessible to legit newcomers. If you have beaten the game, however, you'll have the questions you need not to get lost. Although, if you really don't want to watch this video, then you can consider these following parts your summary.
Alright, yeah, no, I appreciate that kind of summary, and it's probably something I should put on my videos to a certain degree. But I don't know, it's kind of hard to like do that as a content creator because I tend to assume people have a pretty decent base understanding of the lore, and maybe that's not the best thing to do, but at least for me personally with the topics that I tend to cover, it tends to become a bit too long for my liking if I go into like super excruciating details. Hey Bella, yeah, and Beans and Rice, no AI images. Well, we haven't found any yet. Here we go.
In the lands between, that is to say, in the fictional setting of this video game, magic is the art of making what's imagined into what's real. Here, any image you envision, regardless of the method for that image's conception, being it one made from studying the outside world, the worshipping of something, or an image that's been imagined by someone else and then given to you, can, if the imagined phenomenon itself is complete enough, be forced into an existence entirely of its own.
Right, so just for like some constructive feedback for TLGTW is that they made the author apology about like sorry for the occasional noises and clicks you'll hear in the audio. They don't own a mic, so they use the PS5 controller instead. Damn. And with it being directly on the table, it picked up every click and drag of their mouse as you read through the script. You can show it to you in more detail later in the video. That's understandable. So yeah, a little bit of constructive feedback is if you are obviously using some video editing software, if you just put background music, that can help offset those kind of noises, but you just have to really work on balancing the audio, and certain programs can help get rid of these background noises. But Yeah, I'm assuming like if you're just starting out your channel, I don't know how much content they have. I'm a little bit curious. But yeah, let's do that. Oh, so they literally only have 2 videos. Well, that kind of makes sense. Yeah. So if you happen to see this, that's just kind of like a little bit of advice because it won't be as noticeable. It'll still be there, but not as bad. She's really new, but her videos are based. Okay. Audio is killing you now while video making. Yeah, it can be like that. It takes, a bit of experience, but once you get it, it just becomes part of the skill set. Hey Tyler, welcome back into chat. Nice to have you again. Maybe not like a $40 microphone, but it'd probably be better than the PS5 one at least. All right. I thought I was gonna say something else about that. I guess not. Okay, let's go back in.
Here, any image you envision, regardless of the method for that image's conception, being it one made from studying the outside world, the worshipping of something, or an image that's been imagined by someone else and then given to you, can, if the imagined phenomenon itself is complete enough, be forced into an existence entirely of its own, mind brought straight into matter, without any of reality's material limitations holding back their potential. And so, the possible forms magic can take, by its very nature as what's taken from the mind and made real, is without any limits in variety. Creating things from nothing, through sorceries and incantations, powers like teleportation through pools of blood, the physical transformation of living things, like what happens to the bodies of the Erdtree Guardians, servants of Rot, and the growing of omen horns on the Sanguine Nobles, and even the creation of entirely new life forms, like with the Crystallians. The actual performing of this magic, however, has 2 strict limitations. To start, this magically enabled realization of the initially unreal is solely able to be manifested from an individual's imaginary vision. Examples of these visionaries would be like fellow scholars studying a common subject, thus establishing a vision made from their observations. Believers of a shared faith, establishing their vision from their agreed beliefs and trust in those beliefs, and even individual people who manage to conceive entirely new forms of magic all by themselves, through naught but hard work and focus. In essence, this first limitation behind magic's usage is exactly reflected by how sorceries and incantations require you to have a high enough amount of relevant knowledge in order to cast them. It's representing whether or not your character is capable of properly conceiving the effect that they're trying to make into reality.
Yeah, and so just to kind of go along with that idea, I understand where they're coming from with this, although I do think there are probably some more limitations that they haven't like talked about yet, because with this kind of line of thinking, why not make the argument that somebody could just like believe in a perfect being so strongly that it comes into existence? You might need to have like that kind of certain faith or intellect requirements canonically, but I'm not entirely sure that even if you could have that faith or int requirement met, that you could actually just kind of like manifest that stuff. Or maybe you can and make that argument with the mending runes themselves, but I do think there is probably some hidden mechanics between intellect, sorcery, faith, and incantations that we just don't really know. And then there's also like the arcane stat to consider. What snacks are we all grabbing for this? I've got my good old trusty ice water. Yeah, and so as Eldon said, what if you tried doing that and your heads explode instead? I think, that could potentially be what happens to Selin, but I think it'd be really funny if you just had like a circle of folk surrounding an individual, and then they just look at them really hard, believing that that individual will be get like super good powers or whatnot, and then you just kind of repeat that process over and over. So I do think there are supposed to be some fundamental restrictions to how like the laws of nature work in Elden Ring. So I don't think it's quite this simple, and I don't think they're going to say it's this simple, but I'm just going to, get on my pedantry soapbox right there.
If a spell isn't able to be properly conceived, the magic isn't able to happen. And conversely, the better something is conceived, the more powerful that magic is able to be performed. Let's look at this principle in action. It's actually quite intuitive. You are someone who is about to use magic and cast a spell. The spell you envision is a fireball appearing in your hand that after appearing, you'll then throw to explode upon wherever it lands. Your conception of this image is powerful enough that you succeed in magically manifesting that image from your own mind into real life. The exploding fireball now materially exists. It exists for you, the rest of the universe, and perhaps most relevantly, the victim to whom your fireball was created for. And, depending on how effectively you conceive the spell that you want, the more effectively you make the magic that you create. The subjective fantasy of your spell, which existed only in your mind, has now been cast into objective reality, existing now outside of your mind. The likes of ordinary plants and animals and inanimate objects like the clouds lack the conscious capacity required to imagine something solidly enough as to use magic themselves, and so remain untouched by any sorts of magical effects unless some kind of outside influence induces those manifestations onto them. But here is also reached the second principle in regards to the nature of magic. Its potential for variety is limited literally only to the imagination, therefore limitless. But the scale by which that image can be made manifest is directly proportioned to the spending of a unique metaphysical resource, that which the souls of all living things are composed of. The power of life itself, the essence of life.
And that's actually probably a really good point to bring up in relation to this idea. So yeah, it might not just be as simple as thinking something into being as much as like first being able to conceive of that image and then also having enough kind of like mental or spiritual stamina to instantiate that thing into being, if you want to like consider like the FP meter or something else. But as far as like animals not having magic, I understand where they're coming from with that. I just kind of wonder how they feel about like falling beasts specifically.
Life, as Gowry puts it, souls, or, for a more unique name, immortal essence, as Roderica calls it. To make this resource's usage more clear, however, I'll be tending to refer to this subject as merely magical energy, but names like life energy or life force would be most accurate overall. As its in-game labels suggest, this immortal essence is intrinsic to all forms of life and continues to exist even after the original creature where the energy came from has died. As my made-up label suggests, magical energy is what's used when performing magic. Here's what I mean. You'll pretend the act of casting a spell is, in this case, the act of using a flashlight. The first limitation, as discussed earlier, is of the image itself that you aim to magically create. This will be represented by the actual design of the device. In this case, since it's a flashlight, it takes electricity, and uses a light bulb to convert that energy into light. Now our second limitation, magical energy, will be represented by the flashlight's power source, electricity. As you've probably guessed, the analogy I'm building here is that for magic to be successfully performed, or for the flashlight to actually work, the design you use must be sound, and you must be able to supply the energy that the design itself requires. The reason it's worth explaining these fictional processes in the first place, however, is that these fictional concepts exist as ordinary natural forces. Just like the other real-life object forces that exist in Elden Ring setting, like energy, gravity, entropy, and so on, the existence of souls, of an essence of life, are fundamental factual parts of its universe. Light bulbs, again, for example, did not exist before they were invented by human hands. The fundamental forces, however, that exist behind a light bulb's function, of electricity and radiation and so on, obviously had already been there. They'd been already existing since the beginning of the universe. They're objective facts of life. When we created the light bulb, it wasn't the creation of something physically new. Rather, what we physically did was envision the use of such objective forces in a specific way that they achieved a specific effect. And in essence, this concept is what this setting's magic system is. In Elden Ring, the process of magic is the utilization of magical energy, a unique ethereal resource innate to life, by those who are able to invent ways of doing so. Literarily speaking, the concept of magic is used as an allegory for the idea of deferring technological advancements amongst different groups. Some magic is more advanced, some magic is more primitive. Some forms of magic end up accomplishing the exact same thing, only with different methods that ended up converging. and some forms of magic are just completely unique, not found anywhere else. You'll find all of the logical implications that come from a premise like this acknowledged in the game itself over the course of its story, both in its literal events and in its actual moral lessons. And although the game doesn't spell it out, since one of life's more notable aspects is that it, well, reproduces, magical energy can also, to an extent, be considered renewable as well. Returning to how this works in universe, though, the power of life is shown to not exist in any kind of homogeneous volume amongst all of its forms. Some beings have relatively little energy, and as such, the magical effects able to be produced by them are comparatively small. Other beings have a lot more energy, with the magical effects able to be produced by them being comparatively huge as a consequence. And just as electricity can be made as a more versatile form of energy than the raw power originally used to make it, let's just imagine that the flashlight's batteries from earlier were powered by a hand crank or something, the power of life can also be converted into different forms, such as the letters of a formless language of light imbued with life, or magical amber harboring the vitality of residual life. And I'll be explaining these both in more detail later in the video.
So Billy Caldwell says, pinning down chronology of very significant events is pretty difficult. Spending this level of effort to build a unified theory of its fictional magic systems is a bit much. I understand where you're coming from with that, but so far I haven't found anything super egregious. I do have some thoughts that tie into this as to what TLGTW thinks about plant life, or the difference between bodily life, which I would call gold adjacent life, or spiritual life, which is obviously more magic soul adjacent life, and the marriage between the soul and the body, or the soul and the will. But all right, let's go back.
Finally, it is worth acknowledging that the design of Elden Ring's magic system is indeed very conventional. Dare I say cliché, on account of us dealing with life force over here. The only thing they don't do is give us a commonly accepted in-the-universe word for this energy, like mana or quintessence or whatever. But George R.R. Martin isn't famous for being avant-garde, is he? And From Software isn't a company you'd call particularly experimental either. That doesn't stop them from both being heralded as the best though, does it? It just goes to confirm what's been tried still reigns true. The feeblest factor by far in determining something's quality will always be its novelty. We can wrap everything up as follows. The second fundamental limitation of magic in Elden Ring is that the more magical energy you have at your disposal, the more magical stuff you're able to accomplish. This principle can easily be seen by looking at the works of Mohg, Lord of Blood. Mohg's mausoleum, as we well observe, is stuffed to the brim with his accursed flaming blood, populated with blood zombies, slimes made of blood, sanguine nobles, and the red albinorics, all with their fancy Lord of Blood related abilities. Not to mention the mountains of this cancer-like blood meat. Outside of this single bit of turf, though, the only places where Mohg's blood stuff manifests are places directly controlled by his followers. For a faith whose magic is drawn from the life force of a mere demigod, reality sucks. Magic from the power of a god themselves, however, well, we know that to be a different tale entirely. Such wide reaches as these, we'll find, are the destined path for those born as those known as Empyreans. More than just the child of a god, an Empyrean is someone uniquely capable of becoming a god themselves, able to manifest a vision on scales so utterly massive as to span entire territories. This power of a god can go on to convert the land itself, all of its plants and animals, and the very clouds above, all to a singular imagination's ideology, or, as the game would say, unto a single order. On our god's newly consecrated turf, the rules of their order are made to direct everything, now subject to the ideology described by the vision that they now totally embody. All things because
I understand where they're coming from, but it could also be the fact that an Empyrean could be no more than a conduit to allow that vision to take place, and that might be why Ranni could need an Elden Lord in her ending as well. So I don't necessarily fully disagree, but I do think there could be other explanations for what's going on with that ending and the Scarlet Rot stuff in particular, because the outer god of Rot could just be using Melania as a conduit for its strength.
Subject to our new god's order. So crushing in its magnitude as to even reach past the realms of reality and influence the outright metaphysical. Even the very passages of death and of souls will be directed down a singular path. So all in all, you can perhaps imagine that the plot of Elden Ring revolves around the idea of if religion physically mattered. Imagine if in real life, what happens to your soul after you die was literally different, determined by if you were a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or an atheist, or whatever. And that you were in some place where it was illegal to believe in anything but, say, Christianity. Where all knowledge of other faiths that disagreed with Christianity, or any perceived threat to their totalitarian rule, was violently put down. Put down through invasion.
They could have sped this part up.
Through exile.
Catch flame. I'm just gonna speed that up.
Through prejudice and slavery.
It's just real life. Hey Jay, welcome in.
Extermination and imprisonment.
Those who live in death fall outside the principles of the Golden Order. Their mere existence sullies the guidance of gold, tainting its truth. And so it is the vermin must be exterminated, down to the very last.
Or you and everyone you've ever known, and your entire society as a whole being completely wiped out.
We commend your deeds. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount.
To make matters worse, these Christians who've conquered your lands have even found a way to infuse their religion, its ideals, into the very earth under your feet, magically manifesting the vision of their ideology into material truth. Now, the mere conception of a world before, separate from its current rulers, is impossible to fathom and illegal to try. All that preceded the current age is thrown away, discarded under the label of a savage, chaotic, pagan prehistory. Now, when the time comes that you eventually die, your soul will have no other directions but to be sent into Christianity's afterlife, whether you want to or not, as enforced by your colonizers. No matter what faiths existed before, that you or your people might have followed before, indeed, even if your original faith was in fact the progenitor to the current one, with your world so utterly subjugated under the heel of Christ, nothing will ever await you but the gates of St. Paul or the very depths of hell.
In Marika's own words, the Erdtree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the Order.
So I feel like that has probably inflamed a bunch of like crazy comments. I'm a little bit curious. Oh, corrections. Hey, Crunchy. I should like probably look for the newer ones rather than the top ones to see if anybody got upset about that. Because every once in a while I do get some like really weird comments on my videos whenever like religion gets brought up, which kind of makes it easier to try avoiding that stuff in the future. Is this an ER video or a critique on Christianity? It's definitely an Elden Ring video. Eridan has entered the chat. Yeah.
Or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes. A powerless upstart.
Now, let me stretch this image a little more. Imagine that in truth, the Christian God wasn't as omnipotent as his worshippers preached that he was. Despite espousing infinite power and an eternal existence, what if it turned out he was ultimately just as finite as you were? What if, despite all outward appearances, you and God were in fact fundamentally the same kind of creature?
So there's a really fun game on PlayStation 1. I talk about it kind of often, really. It was called Alundra, and that was kind of part of the premise of it, where the townsfolk's religion gave faith to this god that wasn't exactly a god. So in some ways it was also kind of like Demon Souls, but it's a really good game. I call it like the Legend of Zelda for adults, but of course that was like more in the 2D era. So if you guys like the 2D Zelda games, I'd highly recommend checking out Alundra for the PlayStation 1.
a sapient life form, disparate in circumstance but ultimately congruent. Instead, in tricking you into worshipping him, each and every of your society's souls get tossed according to this outer god's whims, granting him a unique resource with boundless possible uses, a magical power innate to life.
Art draws upon the powers embedded in Glintstone. But what is the nature of such power? Glintstone is the amber of the cosmos. Golden amber contains the remnants of ancient life and houses its vitality, while Glintstone contains residual life, and thus the vitality of the stars.
This raw magical power, through the order of your vassal beast, becomes converted into a form of the utmost east to use, the letters of a magical language.
I can see how and why immortal essence exists, a spirit under the Golden Order.
Well, I see. A remembrance of gold has found its way into your possession. Demigods and even the creator of the champions are hewn by the Earth Tree upon their end into remembrances. They are valuable indeed. These remembrances yet house the power of their former masters. And should you wish to wield that same power, well...
Shall I turn your runes to strength?
By the subjugation of a world with intelligent life, by making it follow your order above all else, by making your worshippers live and die for you, a steady stream and thus a stockpile of this omnipotent, immortal essence is assured. But, being now of eternal life, you are also aware of the long term. You know that no planet can ever be eternally fit for life. How long before just the human race dies out? What about when the sun expands to scorch the earth dry and swallow it whole? That's only like 7 billion years away. Sure, to a shitty, short-lived, wool-eyed mortal, that's incomprehensibly distant. But you're not merely mortal. You've lived for millions, maybe even billions of years already, and for as long as you got something to say about it, you'll live infinitely more, so your wellspring might as well be running out next week. Fortunately, however, the universe is a very, very vast place. Out there are more solar systems than there are singular grains of sand on Earth. So it goes without saying that the Earth itself isn't the only world with life, intelligent enough to follow your faith. So fire your shooting stars out onto space's great expanse. They may silently fly through the void for eons upon eons, but for someone as old and powerful as you already are, a million years or two may feel as fast as the many millions more you've already passed. And when they land on another civilized planet, birthing your vassal beasts upon their alien soil, and assisted by your loyal envoys, a pawn to spread your faith will be found. Thus is established another well from which to tap. Another world whose denizens' magical life force has now been pledged towards your endless expansion and your endless increase in strength. One more Erd tree among dozens before it, of which 100 and more will sprout afterwards, the essence of trillions upon trillions of more pathetic creatures bowing at your feet, just begging.
Alright, this part is just a little bit extra for me. It'd be nicer for me if it was just toned down a little bit, although I understand what they're going for with this. And Anne Rand, thank you again for the 10. I appreciate that. And welcome back into chat. Nice to have you again. Yeah, it's a little bit dramatic, but I mean, I guess that goes a little bit with the showmanship. So some of the thoughts that I was having in regard to their kind of premises here in terms of like magical life and faith and intelligence and all that stuff is, at first I was thinking, wouldn't it make more sense to kind of convert one's followers into the religion and use their like faith and whatnot to just kind of keep bolstering up your religion? Which, you know, at a surface level does make a lot of sense. But then as I was thinking about it a bit more here, that if we make like the, how do we say? I was going to say like the flashlight analogy that TLGTW was talking about earlier, but I don't think that works super well. Okay, actually I think I can make it work. Okay, so if you take that idea of the flashlight being able to produce light, and you say like the battery is what powers the flashlight, in my crude example of like the faith of your followers being what like brings power, maybe if faith were to represent the batteries, if you had a cable and you can plug it into the wall, maybe that would be like their actual life force. So maybe if you cut out the middleman of trying to make things fundamentally believe in you, and you just slaughter them and then take all their life force anyway, that might be more plentiful for your purposes. But to be fair, we don't exactly know if like all life is finite or like contained into like the current version of something, or whether or not it's like fully spread out throughout their life. So to explain that a little bit more concretely here is if you kill somebody when they're like 20, are you literally taking the rest of their life power, or are you only taking what they currently have? So it might be better to like farm out a person's life forces or their faith perhaps. So oops, I don't exactly know like what would be better, but that's just kind of the thoughts that are coming to mind right now. Oh, and also thank you for becoming a channel member, Anrand. I hope you enjoy the few emotes that we have. Thank you very much. All right, Teen Sith, nice to see you as well. Yeah, I didn't welcome you in. You'll be back. Gotta go take care of the dreaded dishes. With the capital D's indeed. You just finished Death Stranding and you see Emily and Marika's role sort of paralleling. Yeah, when I was watching other people play Death Stranding, I was like, well, this is definitely a fundamental Japanese game. I saw like a lot of parallels between like Dark Souls, Final Fantasy, obviously like Ava. You're glad I'm not a god? Hey, that wasn't exactly my idea. If anything, it's the farming one, which I think you could make the argument that's like what Marika is doing, because if you have like the Erd Tree and it's powered by sending souls into its roots and then like sending them back out, you could say like that's just kind of her way of forcefully converting followers, perhaps. And again, that's not exactly my idea. That's just kind of like what the characters in the games have already done. And that's actually something we've been talking about kind of a lot on the Discord a little bit recently, whereas like when the Erd Tree first came into being, why was it not exactly, how do I say it, like not like the cornerstone of order, and it only became the foundations of order later, like with a bunch of conquest and stuff. And so one idea that I've had in terms of it being like the crucible of life is once the Erd Tree is grown and you start killing people, you're adding their life into like the root stock, and so it's kind of all getting blended together. So you could say like it becomes where all life gets blended together, and then that's where kind of all life from that point comes out of. So that could be why Godfrey continued to wage war even after they fully grew the Erd Tree and defeated the giants. In real life, we just went on crusades, and you want replenishing power and for the source to grow. So yeah, so it's kind of hard to conceptualize what that means for Elden Ring, because you can kind of recycle life with perhaps like Erd Tree burial and rebirth ? At the very least, there is like the Amber Egg, so there are some powers of rebirth associated with the Erd Tree, although we don't exactly know how much of Renala's magic really goes into that. And Billy Caldwell said, did she handicap the Erd Tree's power by sealing Destined Death? I don't know if she handicapped it exactly. The way that she talks about wanting to understand their grace, I think she was going to take what like little, maybe not like what little life there was, but whatever life there was, and if she removed the death from it, and I would argue like death is kind of part of life, if she got rid of one half of that aspect, it would just mean that things couldn't die. And so she's just kind of trying to reinterpret what life means, perhaps. Ayn Rand agrees with that without the natural life-death cycle, the Erdtree's bounty ran out almost immediately and became an object of faith. Yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. And obviously, this stuff is kind of subject to change, especially with later content. And so these are just kind of like my best working theories about how it could work. Okay, going back to the video now.
Begging to be sacrifices to perpetuate your eternity. So edit that Elden Ring if you want. How could I possibly care for the creative endeavors a few fools do with that smidgenly taste of my unfathomable power? It's a beast of my very invention. The immortal essence sent through my vassal returns to its creator all the same. For no matter what mending rune you use or don't use when you repair the Elden Ring, regardless of if you paint the skies brown, gold, or gray, it's still the same single ending. 'Cause at its core it remains my Elden Ring. At the end of every age it stays, an order made from a beast created by none other than yours truly, heralded by my servants, not in order to serve you, but to make you serve me.
So the first part of the video is a bit grounded, which I enjoyed. This part right here is a little bit too dramatic for my tastes. Although, like, I get where they're going, it's just, yeah.
Thanks for staying a pawn, Elden Lord. Marika's attempt at sovereignty was nearly an inconvenience, but in the sorry state she's in now, after you killed her, just to piece her back together like a broken doll, along with the Elden Ring her Empyrean body sustained, we can at least be sure we won't try anything again. Can you imagine if the Elden Ring had actually been destroyed for good, though? Oh well. So, have the deep seductions of these snake eyes roped your attention? Or are you merely gawking at this simple sharpshooter's band-aid rat bravado? I can line up a bunch of pieces into a nice-sounding story, but if a nice-sounding story was all I had, then what would you call this other than a presentation of my creative writing skills, right? If I am, then allow me to explain. Beginning with, of course, what this game actually means when it uses the word order. To preface, order itself is, of course, a mundane word from real life, so it has a lot of different real-life definitions with different connotations. However, within the bounds of this video game story, the term order is solely used to refer to a single extremely specific meaning. Since the concept of order in this game is so heavily fictionalized, given all the magical things attached to it, I feel like it's worth explaining to its surest details. The concept of order can be accurately defined as the enforcement of an ideology, with the assurance that the ideology itself is innately arbitrary. As a system of ideals, they're necessarily made by someone and then decided upon as what should be done. An example of the concept of order would be the names of fruits being listed by where their first letter occurs in the alphabet. An equal example would be if the names were ordered to be written in reverse instead. Here, the ideology is the pattern that someone decided fruits should be labeled in, and the enforcement is the actual placing of our fruits to fit that pattern. Design and implementation. In other words, as we went over earlier regarding the process of magic, imagination and manifestation. You could describe an example of perfect order as that of a computer program. Its code enforces the order envisioned by its creator with no less than 100% precision. By the computer's very nature, there is no misinterpretation and no compromises. Even if, in this perfect subservience, bugs and glitches in the program lead the computer to crashing, the error was not due in any way by the computer getting something wrong.
Yeah, and oddly enough, that is kind of how I describe the way that Gold Masks looks at the Golden Order in comparison, like, with Radigan's version of it and Marika's ideas about it. So, just to kind of rephrase that, the way that I think the Golden Order worked under Radigan is that it was never broken, and those who live in death still fall within the bounds of the Golden Order. However, I think Marika didn't like the consequences of the Golden Order and what that meant once things like those who live in death came into being, because, and this is a bit more subjective here and very arguable, I think the reason Marika shattered the Elden Ring was more or less because of Deathroot and the death of Godwyn, but more the Deathroot stuff because it stopped the souls returning back into the Erd Tree. And I think she was probably more focused on the Erd Tree than the actual Golden Order. But again, that's very arguable stuff right there. And with those who live in death stopping things from returning to the roots, that would make them kind of against the Erd Tree. And as Corrin says, like, the Erd Tree is the heart of the Golden Order. It kind of makes sense that Marika hates them, but because they exist within the confines of Order, and that's just the system that, like, the Lands Between operates under, they're still technically part of the Order, which is why I think in Order Healing, Gold Mask, it talks about how, like, Gold Mask laments the hunters and their dogmatic ways, because all the good and great wanted to contend with was absolute evil. But does absolute evil truly exist within the fundamentals of Order? You know, that kind of idea right there. So Gold Mask thinks those who live in death are probably okay, and Marika does not. And the issue is that Marika, as the god of the Golden Order, turned her back on the Order, and so she was fickle. So Gold Masks wants to make it so the gods could not turn their back on Order and just kind of have to accept the consequences of their actions there. Do Twi'lek not have souls? Where do they go? So those who live in death actually do have souls. It's Godwyn who does not have a soul, and that tripped me up for a while, but I kind of figured it out when I was looking through, like, the spirit ashes, and we had those who live in death spirits. So if those who live in death were soulless, how could they have spirits to work spirit ashes? That shouldn't work, so therefore those who live in death have spirits. So once I figured that out, it kind of started to make more sense to me that Godwyn is kind of his own thing, and those who live in death are the quote-unquote, like, immortal essence that Roderica talks about. And the reason why they are those who live in death is because the souls don't die under the Golden Order. They just exist in perpetuity. And once they come into contact with Deathroot, they kind of regain the will to live, according to Roger's dialogue. So because they regain the will to live, they kind of regain their spiritual form and want to exist physically in the world because they're dead, but they don't want to be dead. Perhaps. So again, that is partially speculation, but I do think it's really well supported by the text. The soul stopped returning before the Deathroot, though. Che, you would need a source for that, and I would certainly say that there were examples of ghosts or spirits existing outside of the Erd Tree, especially with, like, the regal ancestor spirits. But I believe the reason why the spirits don't go into the Erd Tree anymore is because Deathroot was infiltrating the roots of the Erd Tree throughout the Lands Between, and then Marika shattered the Elden Ring, which probably disconnected the Erd Tree from its roots. That part is arguable, of course, but even if, like, the Erd Tree was still connected by the roots, there is enough Deathroot down there to probably infiltrate and muck up this system. Yeah, no, the Age of Abundance and Root Resin aren't really kind of related to that. So the Age of Abundance should have ended well before Godwyn's death. Alright, I'm going to go back to the video.
But solely due to flaws in the order itself that it was given, as it was envisioned by the program's creator. A rune of transcendental ideology which will attempt to perfect the Golden Order. The current imperfection of the Golden Order, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. The perfect subservience by which a computer acts would indeed be an ideal the Scarlet Rot and the Elden Beast can be said to strive for. Make everything yellow, or make everything red. No nuance and no compromises. The use of vision in this context is merely the vision of order that is going to be enforced. That is to say, vision refers to that ideology's actual, ideas. Forgive me if I sound really stupid. I'm just trying to be thorough in describing the story's use of vision and order outside of what those two completely ordinary words actually mean in real life. Just, alright, think of it like this. A lawmaker envisions a bunch of laws for a new system of government and writes them down. Their vision of order has now been transcribed, as it were, and the transcription can then be given to a powerful person who will go on to enforce the ideology of that new system. In this allegory, the paper whose laws are written on is the vision of order, as envisioned by the lawmaker that the enforcer acts as vessel for. In the exact same sense that the Elden Ring is a vision of order that Marika serves as vessel for, and the Scarlet Rot is a vision of order that Melania serves as vessel for. These visions are just where the rules envisioned by the creators, the GW and the sealed outer god of Rot, respectively, are transcribed. And for them, the Empyrean who is vessel to that vision acts as the enforcer of that ideology, as its god.
Actually, I'm wondering now whether or not the Enforcer is technically the Elden Lord, and that might tie into the whole idea of the Elden Lord, quote-unquote, brandishing the Elden Ring. This is something we were talking about in the Discord the past couple days, where, like, what does that actually mean to brandish the Elden Ring? Because in the Japanese for it, kakageru could mean to, like, literally, like, lift something over your head, but within the context of the game, that doesn't quite work. So it could be meant more in the sense of uphold the ideal that you have of the Elden Ring. So if you're literally supposed to uphold the ideals of the Elden Ring, does that mean you're its enforcer? You could certainly make the case that Godfrey is kind of like Marika's enforcer to some degree, but yeah, I don't know. It's just really weird because we don't exactly know what the Elden Lord is to begin with. So this could be a potential explanation. And of course, what I'm saying here isn't necessarily completely incompatible with TLGTW here.
Thus, the concept of order, the magical enforcement of an ideology. This metaphor can be stretched farther as well. Say the lawmaker is able to come up with their ideology, but also has a power to be the enforcer of that order themselves. That's what Ranni does at the end of her questline, envisioning an order solely of her own design, and applying it herself when she ascends as the god to replace Marika. With us as Night Lord, I guess. But we'll return to Ranni later. Just like how Columbus acted under the sponsorship of, the King of Spain or whatever, bringing the order of Spanish rule and Catholicism to the chaotic New World, Marika acted as a mere puppet ruler for the Two Fingers and their Elden Ring, themselves envoys to the greater will. Under that borrowed power, magically granted by the Elden Ring itself, she brings her golden order to the lands between to enforce its ideology over its own native societies. Thematically speaking. Anyhow, someone's ideology can, of course, be shared and prescribed in various ways. The most obvious means, perhaps, would be through written words. Or, if the intent was for the rules of an ideology being enacted to utmost precision, you could indeed allude to the nature of a computer program.
Did I read these? All right. Fingers cannot speak, yet these are eloquent. These are eloquent. Persistently they wriggle, spelling out mysteries in the air. Thus did we gain the words of our faith, in yellow text. White, cipher ring, one of the lost mystic codes said to have been bestowed by the Two Fingers. Cipher pata, encoded sword. A formless sequence of ciphers comprises its blades. The furtive inscription appears to hang in the air. The language of light spoken by the Two Fingers. Elden stars. Sent a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring.
Someone's ideology can be expressed through example as well. A true work of art that by itself embodied to its utmost the red blossoming order its creator envisioned.
Since Melania fought Radahn, and the great scarlet flower blossomed in Aeonia, I have dedicated and to the resplendence of the Order of Rot, the cycle of decay and rebirth.
Those who dwell within poison know rot all too well. The death that begets life
The
that comes
ideology
to all
for an
equally.
order can even be envisioned by someone on their own, for instance, through study of the natural world, drawing from what is observed and writing a set of rules to match.
I go now to the night sky. It is there I shall find mine order. Mine will be an order not of gold, but the stars and moon of the chill night.
It may be relevant to explain what, literally speaking, I am actually doing. To draw on the sand, as it were, the target I'm aiming is for, in no uncertain terms. I am aggregating all of the separate, disjointed pieces of information that involve the various stories within this game, rejoining an otherwise fragmented narrative. Then, I put in my own words what the game's story literally is, and recite it to you, the audience. The reason any of this bears doing in the first place is due to Elden Ring's use of what's often called non-linear or disjointed storytelling, where events are told to us, for example, out of chronological order. And so, for the goals of this specifically, I'm restricted to, dare I say chained to, strangled by, working only within the elements of the narrative itself.
Alright, so Billy Caldwell had asked, but Erdtree burial would be for warriors and such killed in battle, as opposed to the old-as-hell nobles stumbling around alive, instead of being given their mandatory retirement packages. So, there's a couple things that go along with that, whereas like Erdtree burial may have been awarded to warriors at the beginning of the Erdtree with Godfrey and stuff, but I think once Radagon became Elden Lord, there could have been a change in how it operated. We don't necessarily know. It could have still been used for things that died in battle. However, I would also make the argument that's when things first initially became immortal in the Lands Between and didn't exactly die as they used to. So, while I do think Erdtree burial was still a practice then, it must have been done to probably a lesser degree just because things were probably dying less. Alright, going back to the video.
Since the narrative of Elden Ring is so shallow and cohesive, plopping every piece into one place and looking at it is all I've got to do. Not that the detective work isn't a lot easier described than it is performed, but still. To reiterate, the goal I have for this particular project is simply to recount the narrative contained within the video game, Elden Ring, released on February 25th, 2022 for PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, with zero speculation involved. In other words, piecing together the story as it exists solely within the canon of the game itself, and nothing outside of that. The reason I'm posing such a limitation on myself is, of course, that if I were to use elements of my own imagination in what's presented, referred to as speculation in the Soulsborne fandom, sort of like we're in a Bye-Bye Man situation where you aren't supposed to say what it actually is, it's what's called a head canon, and obviously separate from the existing content in the video game that we all share. Because it's canon, the content of the work, plus the content that came from an audience member's head. Various headcanons can be better than the actual canon of a media itself, in various ways, but presenting my personal headcanons for this game as anything along the lines of, this is the true story, would be misleading you at best, which is why I'm putting such a tight restraint on myself in the first place. Because I am, and sometimes unfortunately, not seeking to make any kind of headcanons in the majority of this, as close as I can get to zero imagination will be presented. As such, I may only reference elements that literally exist within the game, information whose existence is not itself disputable, also known as that.
Feels bad, man. My man's right here can't even include the story trailer.
Which is canonical. Of absolute importance, however, dare I say of grave importance, even the most important thing for your ears to hear in this whole pile of disclaimers, is that you must never forget the following. The canon story of this game is not inherently the best, quote-unquote, version of Elden Ring's story there is to be told. Quality in and of itself can only be held in the eyes of the beholder. The only thing canon inherently provides is the firmament that all of us consumers share by virtue of us buying, downloading, and playing the same video game. For people who consume media without producing...
All right, let me read their red stuff. So just before I go into that, I do kind of agree with them that the canon isn't necessarily the best version of the story that could be told, because the story in your head is the best version of the story that could be told, because that's the one that's going to resonate with you the most. And so their disclaimer here at the bottom is, just because this video's stated purpose is towards recounting Elden Ring's canonical story doesn't mean they're trying to say that any other intended presentation of Elden Ring's story is suddenly less valid. If what you value in Elden Ring lore is different than what's presented as this video's goal, the simple fact becomes that this video is of lesser value than what you do prefer, and they have no want in attempting to deny this. You're lucky that Dumb and Dumber didn't write Elden Ring? Yeah. Count Chocula. Man, living the high life. You mean the real story is about a murder hobo who doesn't know what soap is? Hey, at least they know what soap is. They just don't use it for bathing or showering. Anyway, I was going to say something else about this. Yeah, I don't disagree with the premises here. Oh, yeah. So, I think it's a very bold claim to say that they're only going to use the canon and not rely on headcanon to some degree. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with speculation to a degree when it's properly set up as speculation, and as long as it's kind of grounded to the quote-unquote firmament provided by the games. So, good luck with this. I have a feeling they'll probably inject some headcanon, not because I disbelieve them, but just because it's a little bit of human nature and we can't all be perfectly objective beings, sadly. Hey, Ulcerated, welcome back to the stream. Camerahead, I think I've seen your name before, but welcome in. Do you think that Goldmask's ending is the good one, per se? I don't think so, and I think the issue with Goldmask is the more that I've looked into it, it seems like he would prevent any other orders from forming after his, so they can't iterate on his version of order. So his version of order is kind of saying that Radika's initial version of the Golden Order is the bee's knees, and nobody should be able to mess with it. So if his perfect mending rune is actually perfect and will stop other people from messing with the ring, then that might be a thing. For a while, I was wondering if he would remove free will, but I kind of don't think that's exactly what it means. But at the very least, souls would kind of exist forever, and with the way that we have like the wandering nobles kind of being like hollows going around, I don't think that Goldmask's ending should be quote-unquote good. I don't exactly think there's a good ending, depending on how you feel about Ronnie's, but Ronnie's would probably be the closest, because I don't think like those who live in death are exactly having the best of times either. But that's a good question. Isn't the canon intentionally vague to encourage headcanon? Yes. And welcome into the stream, Metal Fingers. You agree your interpretations are your own, but you don't think you should favor your interpretations over what is said in the game. Yeah, I understand that. However, I mean, people are going to like what they like and believe what they believe regardless of what the game says. So it's not exactly like a flaw of the game and its lore per se. It's just like people can only contain like so much information in their head at one time, and it's very easy to not have literally all the relevant information about the game in your head at a time that would like discredit your current headcanon. And for whatever reason, some people also just would prefer to think about the game what they like. So it's just kind of like a human thing and an individual thing. It didn't start yet? Yeah, right. Scowleasy says that Goldmask's ending probably restricts the freedom of the gods. Regular people, hopefully not. I think the only freedom it might really restrict is freedom to modify the Elden Ring. Ayn Rand unironically believes the Flame of Chaos ending is the most egalitarian one, and they can spend hours defending it. Understandable, which, I mean, part of the reason why I made my April Fool's video about the Frenzied Flame ending is because I was focused on saying it with a straight face, but not exactly giving out all the information. So it's kind of filled with half truths, but those truths are still kind of truths, you know? Camerahead doesn't trust Ronnie because she's basically upstaging everyone to create her own world. And seeing how she treated Blythe, she's basically going to discard the main character the moment she finds someone more useful. To be fair, she is being kind of controlled by the Two Fingers, so even though she loves Blythe, she knows she needs to sacrifice him to become the Empyrean and free everyone else from the Two Fingers' grasp, perhaps. So I think there's a certain amount of empathy and understanding that can be applied to Ronnie's ending, but I don't want to say, like, to be fair, like, the only way you can become an Empyrean or an Elden Lord is by cracking a lot of eggs and stepping on a lot of toes to ascend that Elden Throne. It could be that the Greater Will wanted Marika to remove Destined Death to get more power by having immortal followers and then also conquering the lands to get even more followers. Not all infinites are the same size. That's an interesting possibility. You might be right. We just don't have, like, the full picture of things. Did you miss anything? You missed quite a lot, but we got past the dramatic part of the video, and it's been a lot more grounded since. So yeah, going forward, Teen Sith, this dude or lady, this person doesn't want to use, like, headcanon in any capacity, which I say, good luck.
Downloading and playing the same video game. For people who consume media without producing fanwork of their own, that is to say, all of us most of the time, concerning ourselves with only the baseline that is canon is all that's desired. We buy the game, we play it, we watch videos about it and share pictures, and that's the end of that. But for those who aren't like that, those people who become interested in producing content for the fandom, I have an important message that I beseech you to consider. If you are unsure of what a canon element is regarding something you're making content for, or you personally dislike what the canon element of something is, simply make shit up. It's a lot more enjoyable than pretending to walk on eggshells. And so, for the times when I do bring up my own imagination, for any which reason, I will say so. But all that out of the way then, let's talk.
Oh, okay, so they haven't completely abandoned headcanon. I thought they were going to say, like, the entire video, there's going to be no more of that. So I got a little bit ahead of myself there.
About Empyreans. We require the setting of 3 basic facts in the stone to properly understand the concept of Empyreans and how they're used within the story. Number 1, Empyreans are those born of a single god. This is simply immutable. Melania's remembrance states it in extremely certain terms. Miquella and Melania are both the children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans, but suffered afflictions from birth. Some may say that this wording is actually ambiguous. It is not. Just look at it. We can be easily sure of this anyway, since more than one person directly corroborates what Melania's remembrance says. The matter of this being literally the entire purpose behind Ronnie killing her flesh in the Night of Black Knives, the reason Miquella and Melania were born the way they were, the reason why only Ronnie, Miquella, and Melania were selected as potential successors to Marika, the reason Moog kidnapped Miquella in the first place, and the reason Marika herself was the one that had to be revived to bring back the Elden Ring. Even so, all that stuff might as well be background noise because of how explicitly the remembrance tells you what it means. There is objectively, and I'm using that word properly, no ambiguity whatsoever in Melania's remembrance. There's no statement by the narrator to be recounting in-universe legend, such as when it uses variants of "it said" in order to purposely invite ambiguity.
So many comments are coming into my head. I can't even, like, give voice to one of them in terms of, like, the whole "it is said" stuff. But yeah, no. Who's been watching my videos? Obviously, that's a little bit of a vain statement to make.
To the situation, from stating merely that a certain idea was believed by the fictional people of the story setting, nor is it when the narrator is deliberately making an opinionated statement from an in-universe perspective for poetic reasons, such as in Melania's own Great Rune's description. Her Great Rune should have been the most sacred of all. The description of the Blood Rose, glory be to his inevitable reign, Or in the One-Eyed Shield, this evil deity is believed to have been slain by Queen Marika.
Yeah, so the Blood Rose is a little bit different in the Japanese. Like, it's kind of similar overall. Like, the glory to his inevitable reign is a little bit stronger in English, whereas, like, I'm pretty sure the Japanese is along the lines of, like, just glory to the reign or something along those lines. Actually, I kind of want to look at it real quick. Blood Rose, one word. Oh, yeah, so, like, may there be glory to the... I guess, yeah, I could see where they were coming from with coming rain. Or, no, inevitable rain. It's like the rain that should be. So, yeah, definitely a bit more like an opinionated viewpoint, so I don't really have any issue with what they're talking about here. And then Millennia's Great Rune. I'm pretty sure they're right here in Japanese as well. Millennia's Great Rune. What? Where am I looking? Oh, the last line. Okay. Okay, yeah. Pretty much the same. Hazudeata. And then One-Eyed Shield. Believed to have been... Okay.
One-Eyed Shield, this evil deity is believed to have been slain by Queen Marika. Millennia's Remembrance is giving us this basic fact on a silver platter. What explicitly defines the classification of someone as an Empyrean is them being born of a single god. That's why being born of a single god is what made Miquella and Millennia Empyreans. And to be perfectly honest, I do not understand why so many people seem to be twisting themselves into knots for the purpose of misunderstanding a sentence this utterly basic. It's written in the complexity of a first grade reading comprehension test.
Oh, wow.
What need is there supposed to be to doubt this in the first place? Oh, but what about this comma? How do you explain this entire comma here, attaching the separate clause to the previous sentence? Is it really so unambiguous? Oh, I see. It's actually of a second grader's complexity instead. That entire comma over there could mean... well, it could imply just about anything. There are practically so many possible variations, it could send a literary analyst collapsing to their knees. Well, I ask that you sanction upon me a moment's turn. Allow me to, with my transcendent superhuman genius, reveal unto us all the deep, fathomless secret hidden inside this comma. My swollen, glintstone-ridden Rick and Morty intellect will light your way with a gleaming erudition, and unearth its literary purposes.
TLGTW is definitely getting rid of the people that they don't want watching their video, which is perfectly fine. So Chase said, wait until this guy finds out that the script was written in Japanese. To be fair, I don't necessarily begrudge anybody who only works with the English text, especially if they can't have a kind of a direct relationship with the Japanese text, because you kind of have to rely on outside sources to get your information. And even though I am one of those outside sources, I would say don't just rely solely on me. Try to get as much direct information as you personally can. But obviously, there's going to be some proxies no matter like what method you're using, because say you need to look up a word and you look it up in a dictionary, that dictionary is kind of a proxy. So you either need to have like the full-on native understanding of something, but even then there can be issues because what a person might think a word means might not encapsulate its full meaning, or they might misunderstand it. Like there's definitely been times of words that I thought meant one thing in English because I'd only ever heard them used in context, to later find out that my understanding was incomplete. So there's just you have to rely on something. Anyway, I'm kind of getting really off track there. So yeah, obviously in my community, we like to cross-reference the Japanese text where we can to see if there's any inconsistencies, and if so, what those inconsistencies could mean in the broader scheme of things. But generally, if somebody doesn't have access to these kind of resources, I understand that they can only work with what they have. Are we watching 4 hours of this? Yes, but not all in one night. And TLGTW does use and she and her for their pronouns. Thank you. Yeah, it's been mentioned. I'm just kind of bad at remembering. I'll try to do better. Learning a language to better interpret Elden Ring lore. Indeed. Teen Sith says, it's funny that America equals Radigan is quite explicit, but people are locked in endless debate over if they actually share a body or not. You're just trying to inflame the chat. I see what you're doing. But I mean, there is certain room for contention and ambiguity because we don't know if Mariko was always Radigan, which I think is a little bit clearer in the Japanese, to be fair, or whether or not Marika literally broke off part of herself and Radigan became a literal independent being from Marika and had his own body and did his own thing, or whether or not they were all always just one body. So there is ambiguity depending on your worldview there. So, Billy, they're not trying to say that all Empyreans are born of a single god. He's trying to say, or she's trying to say that that Mikola and Melania specifically, and she doesn't understand why people are getting so tripped up on that.
Prepare to have your mind blown by the depth and complexity of the following revelation.
At first, I was like really nervous. I'm like, are they gonna like cross out Mikola and Melania with Queen Marika and Radigan? Wait, are they saying that all Empyreans are born of a single god? No, I'm pretty sure it's just Mikola and Melania that they're trying to say. Maybe I kind of like spaced out. And this music's really loud in comparison to the rest of the video.
Anyhow, the other two things we need to establish are, number 3, that there is more than one way for someone to be born of a single god, and number 2, that Ronnie came from the Amber Egg. Allow me...
Oh, okay. So they're saying the Ronnie thing is a little bit different. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just missed that context. Or maybe they haven't gone into it yet. And Stella, welcome back to the stream.
The dalliance of really laying out every detail so I can show what I mean, straightforwardly speaking, when I say I only refer to what exists within the game itself. I have my money where my mouth is when I say this video only uses what is canonical. To start, some details regarding the Amber Egg happen.
Uh-oh, this is, I'm getting my danger vibes tingling.
To be lost in translation. It's not integral, but it helps clear out some elements that are otherwise ambiguously written. A very special thank you to my friend Sweet Minnie for helping me with translation biz. Great Rune of Unborn Demigods. In the Great Rune of the Unborn's description, the English line says Great Rune of Unborn Demigods, with demigods obviously being in plural. The original Japanese, however, does not specify if unborn demigod refers to a single demigod or multiple, so the pluralization stated in the English script for this item should be ignored. Japanese relies on the context of the sentence for its reader to tell whether something is plural or a singular. Since this sentence is in itself written to be ambiguous, it meant the translator had to guess, and they just happened to get unlucky. Use of unborn. The word unborn, as it's used in Great Rune of the Unborn, can be considered as fairly accurate to the term used in Japanese, umare naki mono, simply using the verb umarero, meaning to be born. Umarero itself derives from the noun umare, which means birth, and giving that verb the negative conjugation of naki, to convert it into being simply the verb for not being born, and then adding mono, meaning person, to the end to indicate that the verb is in reference to an individual. How the Japanese term is used translates essentially into anti-birthed person.
Wait, what? Hold on. Let me pull it up. Where are we at? So, all right, Great Rune of the Unborn. So, the other things that they were saying was kind of right, although they don't use it there. Let me look. Yeah, it's Umare Nakata Demigodo. So, like, unborn demigods, demigods that were not born. I don't say. Oh, maybe it's the quick text. No. Oh, okay, right here. So the title of it, that makes sense. Okay. All right, never mind. I will be quiet now. So, I how do they phrase that? Let me back up.
Japanese term first convert it into being simply the verb for not being born, and then adding mono, meaning person, to the end to indicate that the verb is in reference to an individual. How the Japanese term is used translates essentially into anti-birthed person.
That is a terrible way to phrase it in English, in my opinion, because it's not anti, it's more like not. So anti means like it's against birth, whereas not means it's just not birthed. But I think semantically they're trying to get to the point that they're saying, but this is just not the best way to phrase it, I think.
So as far as I'm concerned, there's no meaning between the English use of unborn and the Japanese use of umare nakimono that's been lost. It is true that the prefix un, compared to something like the prefix I came up with, anti, implies something more like a reversal rather than the more accurate implication of opposites. But I don't actually believe that. I mean, can you imagine? What prefix should they have used then? Nega-born, anti-born, contra-born, de-born?
No, I mean, unborn is perfectly fine there.
Well, maybe that one is alright. In any case, it doesn't matter. Unborn is fine. I don't think there's even nearly enough room to actually misinterpret what it means within the confines of the game.
I would disagree, at least with the kind of terminology that they brought up. Let's just go to G-Show here. So this is where, like, Naku comes from, Nai, which means non-existent, not being. It's not, like, anti, unknown, not yes, unpossessed, unique, well, okay. Not impossible, won't happen. So it's just kind of like a negation, but not like anti in terms of what it means. I'm trying to think of like, it's fine. Anyway, the other stuff that they were saying was fine. The part that I was groaning about was the pronunciation a little bit. Yeah, the rune of the unborn, the unbirthed. Yeah. What's the point of reviewing these synonymous prefixes and not really clarifying the connotation differences? Are you asking me or them? Going back.
This term that's translated into unborn is obviously used in the phrase Great Rune of Unborn Demigods itself as well. And there it appears in just the same way, although with the addition of an explicit past tense from the verb's conjugation, something that was actually lost in its conversion to English. Umare nakata demigodo no dai rune. Essentially, and mind you, I'm about to give an independent translation. This is not automatically the most accurate. The phrase is written literally as follows. A demigod that was anti-birthed. This is their great rune.
I'll let them keep going.
Indeed, as the official translation says, Great Rune of Unborn Demigods.
Oh, wait, there's a postscript correction?
And as a final thing, the word for born...
Let me try to read that. Postscript correction. They were on the right track, but this is actually inaccurate. A better literal translation is not birthed, with the sense of being a negation rather than opposition. Keep watching for further clarification. Sorry. Okay, I can kind of forgive them there, but I feel like maybe they should have just, like, cut up their video and just put text on the screen, because not everybody is going to be directly watching a video, especially one of this length. This would be something that I would just, like, put on double speed while I'm, like, doing dishes or something, or like doing other chores like sweeping, mopping, all that kind of stuff. So I might not be looking at what's on screen. So I try to be cognizant of that as a kind of a content creator, to try to make things a little bit clearer if I can. And obviously that's not the easiest thing to do when you're already done with your script and everything. But anyway. Unborn and unbirthed wouldn't mean the same thing. I would really need to think about the semantics about that. Unborn to Billy means not yet born. Non-birthed means something different, so you disagree that it's an unambiguous word. Okay. And maybe you guys have a point with that, which should be worth its own discussion too.
Translation says, Great Rune of Unborn Demigods. And as a final thing, the word for born that's used consistently across all this stuff, including the term born anew, is specifically the ordinary word for birth, umare, not the word for rebirth, which is completely different, kosei. To specify, the use of birth in the Rune of the Unborn has no relation to rebirth, like a caterpillar's, but is only related to birth, like a bird's. Anyhow, with all that properly understood, we can continue. All demigods are the biological descendants of Queen Marika, explicit canon, Enya. Of the demigods, only Rani, Mikola, and Melania were Empyreans, explicit canon, Rani. Empyreans are those born from a single god, explicit canon, Melania's remembrance.
And again, I would disagree with that logic here, whereas I would say it is true of Melania and Mikola specifically. Although, if they want to try to take this and run with it, they can try. I just don't think it's as explicit as they may think right here.
Therefore, Rani, Mikola, and Melania all share the parentage of Marika alone, modus ponens, automatically canon. And remember, I am not allowed to...
And that's only modus ponens if the premises are correct.
Insert my own imagination into the situation. My sole concern is information that is present in the media itself. So since, by its nature, a work of fiction is a closed system, the use of valid deduction is inherently reliable in figuring out what is still canonical but not explicitly said. To reiterate, for the purpose of this project, I am ultimately concerned about determining what, when, and where regarding the events of the story, rather than just finding hows and whys that I personally find satisfying. How and why are obviously of great importance. When push comes to shove, and we think something doesn't make sense or is dumb, they are necessarily at the bottom of the ladder, and superseded by the 3 Ws. In other words, what is canonical is always canonical, including if we think it sucks. Anyhow, Rani, Mikola, and Melania all have the same parentage, as we've just...
And I would disagree with that because we are told directly that Renala is Rani's mother. Let me just type in mother real quick. Mogwin, Twinbird. Maybe we're not giving it explicitly. I would need to look into it. So Rani herself calls Renala her mother in the cutscene. Mother's rich slumber shall not be disturbed by thee. So you'd have to do a lot of mental gymnastics, I think, to argue that it's more of like a stepmother situation, a metaphorical one, because... Actually, let me double check the Rykard Great Rune thing. Ooh, this is kind of interesting. So this doesn't necessarily disprove it quite the way that I was thinking. So I was wondering with the Rykard and Radahn Great Runes, where they say that they were amongst the children of Renala and Radagon, who became demigod stepchildren after Radagon's union with Queen Marika. So I thought that should technically implicitly include Rani, but that part at least is a little bit vague. Could be adopted mother, technically. Is Mikola Marika's son? Yes. Do you think them explicitly pointing out that Renala's attempts at rebirth suck is important as it relates to the Rune of the Unborn? Could be a clever way to juxtapose Rani versus the Sweetings. Maybe. I mean, it is also questionable when Renala got the Great Rune. Was Renala already practicing rebirth, or Radagon? Because maybe you can make the argument that Radagon and Marika used the rune to create Rani, but would that necessarily mean that Mikola and Melania were also made from the Great Rune? I don't know. It's just kind of a lot to try to parse through at once. Mean Sith on this one. It's all good. That's kind of part of the fun. So I understand why they would think that Empyreans must come from a single demigod. However, I do think they have a flawed premise in saying that all Empyreans must be like Mikola and Melania. So it doesn't say that Empyreans were born of a single god. It says Mikola and Melania, and Mikola and Melania are not all Empyreans. So this is kind of like the... what's it called? The kind of logical fallacy where you say all dogs are mammals, cats are mammals, therefore dogs are cats. That's kind of what's going on right here. You go ask Renala if she isn't her mom. Your unhinged headcanon is that Radigan stole America's heart and gave it to Renala. That's kind of funny. I mean, I have thought some crazy things similar to that as well. Or whether or not, like, Ronnie is actually technically, like, Renala reborn. But maybe I shouldn't have said anything at all. I just want to look up some more stuff with Renala. I'll continue the video and maybe look at it off here on the side right now.
It's established. Great runes are shaped by their owners, and direct siblings have great runes that are naturally similar in shape. Explicit canon, Mohg's great rune, as well as observably corroborated by Radahn and Rykard's rune. So, which great rune is similar to Melania's? An induction sourced solely from canon, not automatically canon by itself. The Rune of the Unborn was Ronnie's great rune. Here we have my induction. In simpler terms, my proposal for what the game's canon.
Alright, I did find the smocking gun argument here with Ranni's Dark Moon. This moon was encountered by a young Ranni, led by the hand of her mother, Renala. Boom! So, unless TLGTW wants to say that Renala is some kind of incarnation or instantiation of Marika, I think their theory here is fundamentally, canonically flawed. So, with that in mind, I don't necessarily think like this video doesn't have value. It could just be a good thought experiment to explain certain other things. So I'll go back into it now.
Canon could be. Of course, the real question is verification. How am I supposed to tell if this induction that, by itself, merely cooperates with what we've just gone over, actually is the truth, instead of some hypothetical other induction instead? Indeed, to prove that our induction was legit, we'd have to go over every single other element of the story that connects even indirectly with the induction in question, and see if there are any contradictions. Despite what I said previously, to discover the what, where, and when, we have no choice but to consult the hows and whys, and find what connects to everything else in the story, while, of course, still only using what content is canonical. By this principle of elimination, furthermore, the induction that ends up having zero contradictions will also end up corroborated by everything in the game as well. But how could someone like me even begin with the expectation that all, if not almost all, details of the story, both directly told and indirectly told, would coherently align with a single idea and not incoherently disagree with each other at the same time? Surely the only way such an ambition could prove fruitful by the end would be if the creators of the story in question were perhaps experienced or something in creating larger scale, complicated, non-linearly presented stories, such that a plot...
So I think this is a bad argument, not because of... no, I'll just say it, like, this is a weird appeal, pseudo-appeal to authority, that the writers must have good experience and grounds for making the stories because they make stories. It's a little bit circular there. And we have, in my opinion, have seen very many instances of things kind of being retconned over the course of development of their games, as well as within their subsequent games, kind of sort of contradicting things that came before. But nonetheless, I do think a lot of stuff got shifted around with Miquella in development. So while the Rune of the Unborn may have been initially meant to tie into Miquella, it certainly doesn't now, at least not to the same capacity it may have once meant to. And to tie on to that, like, we have other examples of Morgott being called Elden Lord in the 1.0 description for his armor set. So I would treat that stuff with a lot of skepticism. We also have the possibility of there being other demigods that we don't know about because of the ones in like the Wandering Mausoleums, other ones that could have gotten killed on the Night of the Black Knives. It's not unheard of for FromSoft to add in characters at their own convenience, e.g. Filianor in Dark Souls 3. Yeah, and so Billy Caldwell was asking whether or not they use a specific character for biological mother in relation to Renala. The answer is no, but I feel like the burden of proof of trying to make the claim that Renala is Ronnie's stepmother relies on the person making that claim, and they cannot do it with 100% certainty. So therefore, we should not accept this as a kind of a factual statement or a quote-unquote canonical one, and we must treat it with skepticism. Yeah. Why would Renala have to adopt Ronnie, though? Unless she was another gift from Radigan, but you don't think that would be left out of the game. Yeah, so I think there is supposed to be a more direct, like, maternal connection between Renala and Ronnie, which would get kind of overwritten in my eyes if she was given to Renala by Radigan to some degree. You were just thinking that the Souls games are very vibes lore before I said that? Yeah. Okay. Was there anything else I missed? Ayn Rand thinks the Rune of the Unborn was much more important to the proper working of the Elden Ring, and that Radigan gave it to Renala is why Mikola and Melania are imperfect. It's really weird because how was the rune removed from the Elden Ring if, like, Godfrey was still around, I guess? It almost seems like an extraneous thing, which is kind of extremely frustrating. Hey, Koyamusa, yeah, I'll check out some of these comments a little bit later on, because we're definitely not going to get through all of the video tonight. This will probably be like a 2 or maybe even a 3-parter type stream deal, but nonetheless, it's all good. Okay. Let's go back in.
A lot of such a size as this would turn out coherent when scrutinized in the first place. Elden Ring turns out to have a very coherent story. How Ronnie came from the Amber Egg is corroborated by literally everything, without requiring the use of our imagination, / the introduction of any story element not already present within the video game itself, / making stuff up. That's why it's Ronnie that comes out of the Amber Egg in the first place in Renala's Phase 2 transition. And to be honest, did Ronnie randomly coming out of the Amber Egg just not spark anybody's curiosity? Does this not by itself call for further investigation into what connection she supposedly has with the Amber Egg? Anyhow, that's who Renala thinks she's talking to in her Phase 2 transition as well, as she reaches out to the egg. Ronnie is her beloved who shall be countless born, forever and ever. Born is used instead of reborn in this case, because of course, Ronnie's body is specifically anti-born, because she died. That's even why it's called Rune of the Unborn in the first place, because of the events of the Night of the Black Knives. Her body is dead. Her literal birth, what brought her into the world of the living, has figuratively been negated.
And of course, this is just kind of a very unfortunate conclusion based off of a misunderstanding of the Japanese text. So they had mentioned earlier in the video that it was wrong to say that the anti-born means it in a kind of negated sense or like a contradictory sense, and that it should really be kind of like unborn. I don't think that's what she said specifically, but that's kind of what the meaning behind the message was as I took it. So I feel like this argument is really interesting to begin with, but I do believe that Ronnie having a dead body here does show that she was born at some time in history, and so therefore this section of the argument doesn't work. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that Ronnie doesn't have a connection to the Amber Egg that might be worth exploring more further. Hey Spaghetti, nice to see you again.
Obviously, dead bodies cannot inherit great runes, and since Ronnie was dead, her body didn't inherit any great rune at the time of the Elden Ring's breaking either. As such, the great rune passed on to, instead, the Amber Egg where Ronnie's body came from. Literally, the great rune of the Amber Egg is the great rune of a demigod that had their birth undone. The use of the word unborn is indeed meant to be that precise.
No.
It also extends to explaining why the rune of the unborn looks the way it does. Physically speaking, it's accurate to say that we take the demigods' great runes from their physical bodies. I know that is like duh obvious, but it does matter, I swear. As shown by the Great Runes themselves only being inherited by those with direct genetic connection to America, as stated by Enya, and further shown by how Kenneth Haight never inherited a Great Rune, despite evidently being a member of the royal family due to being next in line as the ruler of Limgrave. Yet Morga and Moog do, showing that Great Rune inheritance was not something that was able to be controlled, and was specifically determined by objective factors.
So they're making the argument that the Great Runes come from the demigods. I believe that is contradicted by, the pre-release promo content with like the story trailer and all that. But to be fair to TLGTW's claims here, they have said that they're not going to take anything extrinsic from the game as being canon. So within the confines of their argument here, I don't remember if there's anything that can directly contradict where and when the demigods came in possession of their runes. However, if the demigods gained the runes or the fragments of the runes after the shattering, which I think is very strongly implied here, then Ranni should not have had a fragment of a great rune because she died before the ring was shattered. And to tie along with that, if you want to make these arguments about the shards of the great runes and whatnot, then where is Godwyn's shard of the great rune? Is that the... never mind. I'll just leave it there. Yeah, Gideon says she discarded her rune, but Gideon isn't actually all-knowing. That's what he thought. So he didn't have the full picture, in my mind. Nothingness says, you have a theory that Ranni didn't even tell her mother about the plot, and the Rennala is talking to the egg phase on the transition of her fight, showing that Rennala tried to resurrect her? Interesting. Yeah, I could see Rennala trying to resurrect Ranni. To house the Elden Ring or the rune, you need a physical body. To be fair, though, I mean, Ranni doesn't have a physical body anymore. Well, she kind of does. Godwyn still has the physical body, but he's also been killed. Whenever we kill all the demigods, we get their great runes. So I don't necessarily think, like, you need to have, like, a living body to house the great rune. You love a future 2-hour Discord session about runes and where they come from? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do it with voice because it's really easy to talk over each other, but I mean, that's pretty much what we do on the daily in the Elden Ring lore chat.
With all that
Hey guys, join the Discord. The link's at the top of the chat and in the video description.
understood, we see that the appearance of the Great Runes are determined by the physical bodies of their shard bearers. One, as stated outright by Moog's rune, and corroborated by Radahn and Rykard's rune, and two, shown further between the lines by the appearances of the Great Runes themselves. Godric's Great Rune is faded. Rykard has a serpentine figure coiling around it. Radahn's Great Rune is on fire somehow. Morgoth's Great Rune has his red accursed blood underneath the yellow Great Rune, making it orange. Moog's is soaked in accursed blood, providing an effect completely different from the other Great Runes when equipped. And Malenia's is half-rotted with Ionian butterflies. Ranni's Amber Egg, inheriting the Great Rune instead of her actual body, holds a Great Rune that is visually tiny, because it's a reincarnation, countless born and so on within the egg, just without a soul, since Ranni's soul is still in the world of the living, so the egg is never going to actually hatch. This is why the creations of the Amber Egg are also shitty, and why you need to consume larval tears in the first place to conduct reincarnation, as to substitute the missing component, and ultimately why the Great Rune itself is so small.
So I feel like that definitely goes beyond the canon of the text here, but let's go into the author's note, explaining this less obtusely. Yeah, 5 seconds to pause, sorry. As Ranni's soul isn't dead, the Amber Egg is only able to reincarnate Ranni's body. Containing the body of a demigod is how the egg inherited a Great Rune when the Elden Ring got broken in the first place. Wait, let me try to reread that. The egg inherited a Great Rune containing the body of a demigod when the ring got broken. I'm like having a syntax meltdown in my head. If anybody else can like rephrase this in chat, I would much appreciate it. Maybe it's a me problem right now. Maybe not. All right, so as Great Runes form according to their shard bearer's physical body, The rune of the unborn being from the body within the stillborn amber egg is why it's so small. So, hold on. Let me think about the timeline here. So, okay. The idea is Renala makes a new body for Ranni in the egg. And then, because Ranni's body was in the egg, that's where the Great Rune comes from. Okay, I'm following that now. And then, the Great Rune within the body, within the egg, comes from Ranni. And because Ranni is small, that's why that rune is small. This is what Gideon is describing when he says Ranni cast aside her Great Rune. Okay, so if they're trying to take that line as canon, I can understand, or not canon, but as factual, I can understand where this kind of confusion and this train of thought is coming from. Whereas I think it's much easier to say that Gideon is mistaken, because Ranni should not have had a Great Rune, because the Great Runes were like broken as a product of the Shattering, which I mean doesn't help explain the Amber Egg very well, because it's just a big mess in general. But I think this is kind of an interesting way to describe why it would have a Great Rune. And this would also contradict Muriel saying that Radagon gifted the egg to Renala with the rune inside it, I think. I would need to double check that text verbatim now that I'm like having to think about it with a different perspective. Now that they're writing all this out, this is also the actual meaning behind why it's called the Rune of an Unborn Demigod instead of what I said earlier. Man, you gotta go back and just revise the script. You can't just be doing that. You're retconning your own explanations. Not really, but it's just better, I think, to take the L and redo the hard work that you've done, which is why it took me like 3 months to write Gold and Silver and get it produced. All right, anyway. Is she saying that since the Rune of the Unborn Demigods, that means it must contain a demigod's fetus? I don't think about the fetus. I think I just said that terribly, but anyway. Ranni's body's in the Amber Egg, so when the Elden Ring was shattered, then Ranni's Great Rune went there. So, thinking about the timeline of events, Ranni would have had to die, and then there must have been enough time for Renala to try to reincarnate her before Marika shattered the Elden Ring for the Great Rune in her body to get manifested. But I just think this is terribly convoluted, to be honest. Renala to more lore than there seems is much more interesting before she falls in love with Radagon, but maybe that's because we barely know anything about her during that time. Yeah, it is really lame that she just pulls a Padme and just kind of like gives up at life when her love leaves. Runes could be split off before the shattering, as seen with Destined Death. Maybe since death was no longer a thing, Marika split off the Rune of the Unborn, and that was Radagon. So that depends on the interpretation of the timeline. I am of the opinion that the Rune of Death wasn't removed until Radagon kind of goes back to Leyndell with the ushering in of his age as an Elden Lord. But to be fair, that doesn't mean the Rune of the Unborn couldn't have come from when Godfrey and Marika first became God and Elden Lord themselves. It's just never fully explained. Hey, Square Table Gaming, nice to see you again. Yeah, I liked your video from the other day too. Ranni's body's in the game, you find it during your quest. Yeah, so if you just hopped in now, to give a little bit of context, they're trying to say that even though Ranni died, Renala tried to reincarnate Ranni in the Amber Egg before Marika shattered the ring. So yeah, it took me a minute to get what they're saying there. The rune is the egg, but it's also inside the egg, but it's also in the inventory of the player simultaneously. The Amber Egg is confusing. That's pretty well said there. All right, let's go back to the video now.
Substitute the missing component, and ultimately why the Great Rune itself is so small. Even further along, it shows as well how, logically, Ranni's slaying of her Empyrean flesh would be successful in achieving what she wanted, as despite having been born with the right to inherit, of a chunk of the Elden Ring due to her physical body's genetic connection to the Elden Ring's vessel. Killing her flesh successfully severed it, freeing her completely from that connection. As Ranni goes on to confirm for us herself, and by how her corpse atop the Divine Tower of Liurnia has no signs of a Great Rune either, she was successful.
And again, that's also presuming that the demigods had the Great Runes to begin with, when we were told in the promotional materials that they took the shards of the runes after the Elden Ring was shattered. So that's just a really big discrepancy that I don't think can be resolved from my perspective and TLGTW's here. But nonetheless, there can still be value in what they're saying, and if nothing else, it's just kind of fun to bounce ideas off of each other here. So, what I thought I was going to say something else. Just like Destined Death was severed from the Elden Ring, the Rune of the Unborn was severed from whatever that massive amber and hair is, but at one point it was contained inside it. Yeah, probably. Alright, yeah, I'm just gonna go back to the video.
Perhaps most importantly, this is how Ranni was born an Empyrean in the first place. Despite being known as a child of the mortal Rennala and Radagon the Miracle.
Oh, right. I remembered. I'm gonna back it up. So, I would also disagree that Ranni fully severed her connection from the fingers by the virtue of Blythe still existing and being directly connected to Ranni as being like part of her being, which is why she needs the Finger Slayer blade to kill the two fingers, because they're still connected to Ranni. So her initial plan was a failure because she didn't know any better. So that's just kind of my interpretation of events there.
Successful. And perhaps most importantly, this is how Ranni was born an Empyrean in the first place. Despite being known as a child of the mortal Rennala and Radagon the Miracle, she came from an egg made through the powers of the Erdtree. As such, she counts as a child of Miracle alone, thus fulfilling the requirement of being born of a single god, and explaining how she's Empyrean. This is also what the original purpose of the Amber Egg was, when Radagon first gifted it to Rennala before she became trapped in the Grand Library of Raya Lucaria, and now began to use it for the forbidden rite of reincarnation, as Muriel tells us. The Amber Egg was not only gifted by the Leal Hound of the Golden Order himself, so obviously he didn't gift it to Rennala with the initial expectation of her using it as a heresy machine, but it's also made of amber, and thus from some time around the beginning of the Age of the Erdtree, as the Erdtree itself only produced sap before the end of Godfrey's reign. Ranni coming from the Amber Egg, and thus being how she's Empyrean, also goes on to directly explain why Miquella and Malenia were born the way they were. By the end of Godfrey's reign, the Erdtree's blood had run dry, meaning that by the time it was decided that Malenia and Miquella were able to be born, there was no amber with which more golden eggs could be produced, leading to the twins having been conceived through natural sex between Radagon and Merica instead, thus still fulfilling the bloodline requirement of being born of a single god, yet resulting in them being born vulnerable. And in the case of any doubts, we can be sure that Malenia and Miquella were born through ordinary sex in the first place by the simple fact that Malenia has a belly button. The twin prodigies were born vulnerable due to the genetic defects brought by the self-cest between their...
That doesn't necessarily mean sex, it just means that they have like a mother. But yeah, I would disagree with the timeline there that Miquella and Malenia would be kind of contemporaneous with Godfrey's reign there, because it seems way more likely to me that it would have happened after Radagon became Elden Lord and Golden Order fundamentalism kind of came into being. We have 2 more streams of this? Maybe. We'll see. Like, I'm not entirely hating this, to be honest. I just have, like, strong disagreements.
Their mother and father, while Ranni was born asexually, through the immaculate conception of the Amber Egg, and as such, our lunar princess did not suffer from any defects due to her birth.
So I think this argument there kind of makes TLGTW shoot herself in the foot to first argue that the reason that Ranni's rune is like Miquella's is because they're similar, but now they're different, if that makes sense. I explained it poorly, but I think you guys get what I mean. The chat is on fire. You're completely okay with 2 more streams of this? Marika had an umbilical cord. Does it mean she was also conceived by intercourse? We don't actually know Marika's, origins, but Marika could have been her own mother, depending on how you feel about that umbilical cord kind of looping in on itself. But to be fair, that is a cut item. A very, very cut item. Because umbilical cords get cut, right? Right? Inflicting more psychic damage onto the chat with that one.
The requirement for being born an Empyrean would otherwise imply. This is all just the internal logic of Elden Ring's magic, of course. We aren't given any explanation of how the Amber Egg is actually supposed to work. In this case, the burning question of how is stamped aside by the presence of what, and just like how the likes of Kenneth's family history don't make it into the game, or that the entire continent of the Lands Between apparently has only one farm on it, these irritations exist for the sake of narrative brevity. In order to maintain the shallowness of Elden Ring's greater plot, all information irrelevant to its narrative is purposely left out. As an aside, I also imagine this whole situation might be a showing of how Empyreans are supposed to be born, diegetically speaking. To compensate for requirements of being born of a single god, the only way to produce an Empyrean without any genetic defects is necessarily through asexual reproduction. For Ranni, it was done through the magic of the Erdtree, but since we have no other instances regarding the births of explicit Empyreans specifically, we don't actually have anything else to go off of. So for now, you can ignore this idea. Unless the DLC comes out and reveals somehow that I was totally right. In that case, don't ignore this and send me confetti ball emojis to my Twitter at TLGTW instead. Last and
So I wanted to read what Teenth Sith had said in the chat, which is totally right. That the belly button is what's left of the connection between the umbilical cord and the placenta, which is how a fetus is fed in the uterus. So all it tells us is that Millennia was gestated in a uterus. So yeah, just having the belly button doesn't show that there was a sexual relationship involved in the production of that being. Of course, speaking from a kind of a high fantasy framework here, because I actually don't know a whole lot of cases of like asexual beings in the real world that have umbilical cords. Maybe there's something like that, but my background of biology is a little bit lacking. Are there any characters in Elden Ring explicitly without belly buttons? I think, depending, I don't know if like Morgott / Mikola in their like a hornless form have belly buttons or not. It might just be kind of implied. Let me pull up my screenshot bank. Well, let's just type in Morgott. This might be loud. 1 second. Okay, I still got it muted. This is 1.0. Okay, wrong clip. Doesn't show any belly button. This is a really weird thing to be looking up right now on stream. I'm looking for Morgott's belly button. Anyway, you might be able to argue that like Mikola might not have a belly button anymore because he became like part tree, but it's kind of a semantics. Trolls definitely don't have belly buttons. So this is not the best angle here, but we can't really see a belly button. Yeah, so no belly button on Morgott there. Hey, Jan Jarvis, welcome back in. And Drew, welcome back in. I saw you come in earlier, but I didn't say anything. If we can make a whole person out of silver, we can make them out of belly button. I don't know why I did like the really bad dodgeball voice cadence thing right there. Morgott's kind of shriveled. Yeah. The real question is, do any of the demigods have an outie belly button?
And perhaps most obvious of all, this is also why what is otherwise a massive chunk of fossilized tree resin is referred to as, of all things, an egg in the first place. Rocks are not typically recognized as eggs, of course, and neither are there any other pieces of Erdtree amber. So why is it the case for this one? Since this
I mean, that's just kind of one of the devices that they use where it's more of like a figurative thing than a literal one. But, I mean, we were just splitting hairs about what Mulja meant in the Wandering Noble's description yesterday on the Discord and whether or not they're dead. Because, like, the common interpretation of a Mulja in Japanese, which is the character that's used for, like, Hollow in Dark Souls 1, means something that's, like, dead. But the description for the Wandering Noble ashes, or not ashes, for their set, explicitly says that they're the product of unending life. So, Mojai in here are dead yet alive, but not exactly dead. Albinork belly buttons? Wait, do they actually have belly buttons? Uh-oh, here we go. We gotta look it up. We need to look it up. Well, they're second generation, but first ones don't have it. Okay, yeah. Explain Albin. Oh, no, are these Audis? I can't tell. Why is this not? Okay, there we go. I don't know if I could say that's a belly button. Am I not pausing? Damn it. Where's my mouse? It's on the screen. Yeah, I don't think that's a belly button, technically. It kind of looks like a weird spider. Not really, but... I should do an iceberg video. Yeah, somebody had commented that in the Discord. I put it on the list. It feels like I'm doing an iceberg video right now. No, they have a belly, but they don't have a button. Checking on your end looks the same as what I see. Okay. Yeah, Colo, you can probably try to send the link, but I think YouTube eats links, like, implicitly. Alright. So, hey guys, make sure you comment to me all your belly button pics in the video comments. Okay, yeah. If you use the Discord, that'll be fine, and I'll pull it up. Could be intentionally ambiguous. And if they really are, like, belly button having things, my headcanon is, oh, they're second gen, so they're different. But to be fair, you could just say, like, if they became the products of Silver Tears, or, like, are the products of Silver Tears, they could just be mimicking life that well. So belly button might not technically be the sign that all things came from a uterus. Vid is cursed, but loving the stream. Thank you. Belly button lore. You know, I got a lot of poop for talking about foot lore in some of the other games, but now you guys are the perverts, having me looking at belly buttons.
Piece of amber in particular is where Bonnie came from, an object where a living thing had been born from. That is why it's called an egg. So, now that we've established number 2, we can also establish number 3. That self-cest is not the only way with which Empyreans are able to be created. Just one possible method of fulfilling the born of a single god requirement. And that is how I can, in the first place, adequately determine what is canon, rather than some other hypothetical thing instead. That is also why nobody in their right mind has ever made videos structured like what you just saw. By the very nature of this game's non-linear storytelling, everything feeds into each other, and you'll find yourself dealing with a carpet-sized Sudoku board. Any which ways.
Well, that was one sweeping claim there. Yeah, I feel like TLGTW is shooting herself in the foot with those kind of, like, sweeping statements just because it kind of undermines her own credibility if somebody has seen a video kind of similar to this. But anyway, okay, Colo RPG sent the thing. Let's look at it. I'm assuming in the Elden Ring lore channel. Oh, for Morga? Okay. Let's go ahead and get this thing going. Oh, so you're trying to say, like, this could be the belly button? I think it's just more like his skin where the horns were supposed to be. And in either case, I don't think the Omen twins are born asexually, or like without the uterus. Although it'd probably be a hell of a lot easier on America's body if they were. Enjoy that mental imagery, folks.
The purpose of me having shown all that was, again, just to communicate what my process behind the curtain actually looks like. For the rest of this video, the same kind of nonsense of what you've just seen has all still happened. A considerable amount of repeating myself will end up being required as we go through the various stories of this game, but I will do my best to stick only to what's strictly necessary. So, what's so special about being Empyrean? Let's bite into it. Just for posterity, let's all confirm the people who are actually Empyreans, which, to reiterate, we know for a fact is determined by your genetics. Ronnie, Mikola.
Disagreed, but I digress.
Melania, Marika, and the Glowmide Queen, assuming, of course, that the Glowmide Queen is an entirely separate person, and not, say, a different character's alternate alias. And almost definitely Melina as well. Melina is herself one of the demigods already, obviously, but I believe that since she was born at the foot of the Erd Tree specifically, and by the unique psychic connection she evidently has with Marika, Melina is also an Empyrean as well, and that when she tells us how she was born, what she's describing is her being born through the power of the Erd Tree directly, just like Ronnie was. In any case, Empyreans obviously are special in some important way. There wouldn't be such a ruckus about them if they weren't. Fortunately for us, there are a spry trio of old fogies in this very game who know all the details, and they just happen to let us in on some select bits of the secret. At least...
So yeah, I think there's the potential that Melina could be an Empyrean. I do just kind of disagree with the setup here and trying to make it sound a bit more factual. So I feel like TLGTW is kind of guilty of the criticism she levies against others, unfortunately.
Enough for us to figure things out ourselves. Let's hear what they all have to say, and I'll write down beside them what's most pertinent.
Great Elden Ring, root of the Golden Order. Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision.
Should I be reading these notes? Probably for you guys.
In truth, even in shackles, she remains a god and the vision's vessel.
Being the vessel of the Elden Ring is what gives Marika the title of God. If she wasn't vessel for the Elden Ring, she wouldn't be God. Being the vessel for a vision is what apparently separates an Empyrean from being considered a god.
With no other details in its definition and the diversity of entities given the title of God in this game, showing a distinct lack of a pattern besides all the thusly labeled fellows being super powerful, it is important to confirm in this setting that the term God is just a title, given to any entity that has an adequate power level. There are no other qualifiers behind a creature being named a god. That is to say, Marika, Melania, the Fell God, the Outer God sealed within the Lake of Rot, the God-devouring Serpent, the Greater Will, the Formless Mother, and Placidusax's missing spouse. It's also worth noting that, observing from what we see firsthand with Melania, and guessing from what little we see of a pre-fractured Marika, both being Empyreans who have ascended to godhood, is that their bodies don't look any different from before their ascension. Even after reviving as the Goddess of Rot, Melania unmistakably remains human, just a powerful one. There's no biological distinction to be had between a human and a human Empyrean who's ascended to godhood. Of course, this also aligns with how the ascended to godhood human, Marika, successfully had children with the mortal human Godfrey, one of which went on to have his own children, and so on without any complications.
Just to be pedantic, on a video that's being pedantic, I think it's getting a little bit of ahead of themselves to say that Marika is a human when we're told she's Newman, which all this stuff is arguable, whether or not the demigods should be considered humans, whether or not Godfrey should be considered human, but at the very least, Godfrey is tarnished. So is a tarnished just kind of like a modified Newman? We don't really know. 4-hour video that retcons its own script, classic and iconic. It's all good. Can you prove that the Glowmide Queen is related to Marika? No. They're trying to make the argument, I think, that they would need to be born of a single person god, and with that construct in mind. I think they're just trying to make things tie together a bit more neatly there, but they haven't substantiated that claim now.
All of this goes to show, I say, that the nature of being a god is solely in reference to achieving a certain level of power. You'll also notice how the words god and outer god are both treated as mere common nouns in the English translation, as opposed to something like how the Great Ones in Bloodborne were capitalized as proper nouns. This is because the only distinction between a god and an outer god in Elden Ring is that normal gods come from the earth, and outer gods come from outer space.
And to be fair, they did mention that it was like the localization, but that kind of treatment of a proper noun isn't equivocal to what goes on with the Japanese, where they just kind of like, there's no capital letters, essentially. Well, if you don't count like aesthetic uses of things like katakana and whatnot.
Outer is just descriptive. This language is present in the original Japanese as well. America is called the standard word for a god or deity, kami. Empyreans is translated from the word for a godlike person, shinjin, and outer god merely adds satonaru, meaning outer or external, to kami. Satonaru kami. It's true the term outer god is also used for the standard Shitcraftian pantheon in Japanese, but for self-evident reasons, such as the outer gods having human-like goals, such as the want and subjugation of territory, being threatened enough by the ambitions of humans to take disciplinary action, as shown against the Nox, and being able to be straight-up killed and defeated, as shown by the outer god of Rot being sealed away by the mortal blind swordsman. We can tell that what's described as the outer gods in Elden Ring are not Lovecraftian in any respect besides, say, being powerful and mysterious. And simply put, if that's what you'd call a Lovecraftian entity, then the Mafia or the Feds are Lovecraftian entities too. And that is...
So I would also disagree that the outer god of Rot was killed. You could certainly say that it was defeated or sealed away, but I think killed is just a little bit too strong of a word to use, because the outer god of Rot does still kind of exist somewhat within Millennia, and to just kind of equate them to the Lovecraftian style gods, you might be able to destroy their kind of physical vessel or current incarnation, but that could be the equivalent of like a fish biting a finger that's coming into the pond and seeing the hand go away and thinking that it's like defeated the person behind the finger.
Certainly not accurate.
An Empyrean is no mere demigod. Queen Marika and her king consort Radagon were blessed with twin demigods, and Millennia was one of them. She was born an Empyrean carrying the Scarlet Rod. In the age of the Elden Ring and Queen Marika, the precious Empyrean was born, a new god to forge a new order. Since Millennia fought Radahn, and the great scarlet flower blossomed in Aeonia, I have dedicated myself to her, and to the resplendence of the Order of Rot, the cycle of decay and rebirth.
So we had an interesting question from Stella, which if you guys aren't super into linguistics, I'll apologize about now. So she asks about like the breakdown of like Kami versus Shin. So let's just go ahead and type in our good old, maybe Shinjin isn't the best example. Let's just do Kami with like Romaji right here, not paper. Okay, this is good. So yes, on its own, this should be typically read as Kami, which means like God, spirit, Kami. And when it's combined with certain other things, it can be incredible, fantastic, amazing. So that's the native way to pronounce it, which is the Kunyomi, which is ironically an Onyomi thing. But anyway, so Kunyomi is like the native pronunciation. So like when it's written in hiragana, that's like the native Japanese stuff. So you have Kami, Kan, so like the dash represents like It's part of a longer chain here, and then Ko. Actually, don't remember where it would come up as Ko. And so the Onyomi is like the Chinese reading. You have Shin and then Jin. Jin is exactly the same as Shin. It's just voiced when it's like connected to something else. So Shin is typically what you'd use in front of another character. So for the example of like Empyrean, you have Shinjin. So, oh man, it's not that Jin. Man. Anyway, so it isn't necessarily a Chinese way of saying kami with just Shin in general. It's that compound words that were borrowed from Chinese over history kind of took the Chinese readings with them, which is a real pain in the ass because you don't know exactly what timeline in Sino-Japanese history that the term came from. So Shingaku is like theology. It's literally like the study of kami, the study of like divinity. And that's typically like compound words tend to be more like Chinese words, whereas like singular ones are like native. But that isn't always the case, because why would anything ever be direct in Japanese? So anyway, sorry to go off on that little tangent there. Hakaishin? Yeah. Shinigami? No, that's a different Shin. That's death. Majin? No, that's a different Jin. That one is person. Sorry. Yeah, it's not all that easy in terms of like pronunciation. Teensith is annoyed, and it might be because of the specific way they're referring to the text to present their facts. Her facts. And with the egg equals Ronnie thought, she glossed over a lot of potential counter arguments, and you feel like it's missing a lot of information despite how long this video is. Yeah. You're gonna trust me and stick to Dutch? It's all good. Alright. You're welcome, Stella. And thanks for the question. Alright, enough semantic linguistic suffering. Let's go back to the video. Okay. I was like, did it stop? What's been happening to Caelid since Melania unleashed the Scarlet Rot against Radahn? Is this resplendence of the Order of Rot that Gauri's talking about? Caelid's transformation is due to it being made effective on a massive scale by the Scarlet Rot, which embodies this Order of Rot. Melania was the Scarlet Rot's vessel. The Scarlet Rot is a vision of order.
Millicent, my daughter, would you disown us too, as your mother did? We children of the Scarlet Rot.
Disowned. It's pertinent to see what Millicent can tell us, to perhaps elaborate on what exactly Gauri means by Melania having disowned the children of the Scarlet Rot.
There is something I must return to Melania. The will that was once her own. The dignity. The sense of self. That allowed her to resist the call of the Scarlet Rot. The pride she abandoned. To meet Radahn's measure.
Melania resisted the call of the Scarlet Rot, which she carried, and the Order of Rot that it presented, until, as we see, choosing to finally answer its call when she removed her unalloyed gold needle that we find in the heart of Ionia, and then killing herself on top of Radahn, thus allowing the Scarlet Rot to put the cycle of rebirth into practice. She blooms into the Goddess of Rot and unleashes the Rot unto the lands between itself for the first time. After which, she leaves the Scarlet Rot behind and returns to the Halleck Tree, disowning, as Gauri puts it, him and the kindred of Rot.
So obviously I do have a disagreement with TLGTW saying that Melania killing herself is the first time that the Scarlet Rot bloomed, because we should have had the Lake of Rot predate it, and the blind swordsman sealing away the God of Rot should have predated Melania as well. I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's anything to actually, like, truly say it, but if he was her mentor, it would have at the very least happened before she fought Radahn. Souls YouTubers will be shamelessly scrambling to make videos the same day the DLC comes out. Yeah, that's just how it is. And it's not even going to be you didn't say lore YouTubers, that's fair. The place Millennia impaled herself on her sword is really unlikely to be lethal from what you can tell. Yeah. So I don't want to say like Millennia killed herself to create the Scarlet Rots as well. That's just kind of a liberal interpretation of the events there.
Between itself for the first time. After which, she leaves the Scarlet Rot behind and returns to the Haligtree, disowning, as Gary puts it, him and the Kindred of Rot. The Scarlet Rot is what presents the vision of what Gary describes as the Order of Rot. Millennia had been vessel for the Scarlet Rot itself from birth, and yet there are no signs of this rot anywhere within Leyndell, the place where she was born. She had the rot within her, but it was never actually released onto Leyndell anywhere. Despite being born with the Scarlet Rot, Millennia succeeded.
I like that argument there, but that doesn't necessarily mean she was born in Leyndell. We're not told of when they were, like when or where they were born technically, so she could have been born elsewhere. But not only that, it may have taken time for the Scarlet Rot to actually bloom, even though she was afflicted by it at birth. Who knows?
In preventing it from killing her, as shown by her having only the non-functioning needle while at the base of the Haligtree. She was able to successfully prevent the Scarlet Rot from killing her even without Miquella's direct assistance, something that, as we see with Millicent, is not a given. By the way, this was the meaning of Millennia's dream that she recounts at the beginning of her boss fight. She'd been dreaming of herself continuously holding back the Scarlet Rot inside her body, while still defending the base of the Haligtree, for as long as it would take for Miquella to come back. The unleashing of the Scarlet Rot was something Millennia, while alive, gets to choose. Unleashing the Order of Rot onto Caelid, or holding the Scarlet Rot back, was Millennia's choice. Wishing to raise Miquella to full godhood, Mohg wished to become his consort, taking the role of monarch, but no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber he tried to share, he received no response from the young Empyrean. Ascending to godhood at all is a choice. An Empyrean's ascension is ultimately chosen by the Empyrean themselves.
Sort of yes, sort of no, because Millennia didn't really do it alone, and she might have failed had she not been initially given Miquella's needle. But maybe arguably the same thing with Ranni, I don't know.
In conclusion, Empyreans are beings born with the capability to magically impose an order onto the land itself on a massive scale, becoming gods. The order an ascended Empyrean embodies is determined by the vision of an order that they're vessel for. This vision can be something either created by someone else and then given to the Empyrean, as we see with Millennia with the Scarlet Rot and Marika with the Elden Ring, or it can be made by the Empyrean themselves, as we'll see later with Ranni and her Laws of the Moon. The Elden Ring is, in essence, a magical edict, and like any law or set of laws, without a force to brandish the edict itself, it's powerless. This is shown through the grave importance Marika's followers had for defending the Erdtree, even after it stopped producing its blessings, and the necessity with which the forces of the Erdtree subjugated the lands between. Physically, though, the Elden Ring itself is very, very weak. Not merely in that it was easy to physically damage, as Marika nearly succeeded in destroying the Elden Ring entirely with naught but a primitive stone hammer, but also in the manner that it required the body of a god to continue living. Just like how a computer requires electricity to remain active, the Elden Ring literally cannot exist without a vessel to sustain it. If we allow Marika's body to crumble to ash, like songs in a melted CD, it's just gone. This, might I say, formless nature of the Elden Ring is, however, important in another way too. As I alluded to earlier, the Elden Ring is shown to be something that is able to be molded into supporting any ideology whatsoever. The first instance we learn of the Elden Ring being edited is, of course, of Marika and Malekith removing the Rune of Death, the act that creates what we now call the Golden Order in the first place. But this aspect of the Elden Ring is shown most prominently by the numerous variations of the Elden Lord ending, where not one, but 3 mortal tarnished, completely separate from each other, manage to compose their own mending runes, with which we can patch new features into the Elden Ring's order if we decide to repair it. In addition to, of course, already bringing Death Indiscriminate into the Elden Ring's order, since by this point we've returned the Rune of Death to it as well, the Elden Ring's malleability correlates with how runes, the characters of the two fingers formless language of light that the Elden Ring itself is made of, is not only something that's able to be taught to humans, but even able to be performed by humans separately from the two fingers afterwards, what with how Enya is able to use the power of the two fingers to turn remembrances into equipment, even after the fingers themselves become inactive. How we directly use the magic of the two fingers when we use our multiplayer items, writing our own runes into the air, and how Melina is able to teach us the power of turning runes into strength, a skill known to be otherwise exclusive to the Finger Maidens.
So Teen Sith asks, is she going to explain why the Elden Ring needs a vessel to exist, or did you miss that? It might be kind of tied into the earlier claims that magic is like a light, not a light bulb, but a flashlight, and that you need the idea of it and the batteries, but for what it's worth, TLGTW did not actually say exactly why the Elden Ring couldn't exist without Marika or a god or a vessel, but I think it's because in her mind that the god is the vessel, and therefore if there is no vessel for the ring, it will fail to be like a physical thing.
Like a computer program, it's made of what's actually in-game referred to as code. By the way, I am never going to get over that it's literally called code. The Elden Ring is made of code. It's a fucking magic computer. The two fingers are its alien IT technicians. But, by inserting new code, we're able to change what the program does. The Elden Ring is a tool versatile enough to support whatever order it's given, up to and including really stupid ones like the Dung Eaters. So it may be more accurate to describe the Elden Ring as a platform of order rather than the root of a singular ideology itself, as the two fingers described it. Now,
so to get back on my pedantic soapbox, we'll type in what's used for code. So it's just like secret characters. It doesn't mean code like in the computational sense. Oh yeah, so that one's not going to show up. So anyway, you could get rid of the secret part, and then these are just like the letters. So it means like code in the sense of a cipher, like as in the cipher pata. So just kind of a silly little nitpick that it's kind of funny to me, because as soon as somebody like brings up something else in the Japanese, I'm like, oh, you better bring all of it, dirty laundry and all.
You don't need eyes like mine to tell that the Golden Order was very important, but what we're actually told about the tenets dictated in the Golden Order are minimal. This is for the sake of narrative brevity. Again, just as how every demigod beside the ones we actually fight in game are left without names, in order to deliberately keep the plot shallow, all we learn about what the Golden Order itself is supposed to dictate is that which is directly relevant to the story. The fundamentalists describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Note how this is how the fundamentalists choose to describe the Golden Order. They are subjectively deciding to describe the Golden Order using the objective forces of regression and causality as analogies. This conceit is presented more explicitly in the original Japanese as well. The reason this is important to point out is how these definitions used by the fundamentalists paint the Golden Order as an ideology that apparently includes literally everything. And as earnest practitioners of fundamentalism like Corin show us, that the Golden Order was believed to be inherently, legitimately perfect. Over the course of the game itself, however, we see that this premise is nothing but a farce. First off, recall how Golden Order fundamentalism is, comparatively, a new movement, compared to what was originally singular worship of the Erdtree itself. As we hear from Melina's recounting, Marika makes a speech at the minor Erdtree church, a product of when the sap of the Erdtree ran dry and the first generation of Erdtree seeds had fallen.
I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter?
So just a quick note here that the Erdtree seeds did not technically fall at the end of the Age of Abundance because they didn't fall until the Shattering. So unless in TLGTW's mind that the shattering was contemporaneous with the end of the Age of Abundance, that should not follow.
Frankly speaking, Golden Order fundamentalism is medieval scholasticism, and this is a very direct thematic parallel. Explicitly, it's the use of reason and logic to retroactively justify the state religion. Facing the revelation that the Erdtree was not as perfect as initially believed, Marika's response is the establishing of a new direction, which would eventually be recognized as Golden Order fundamentalism. She changes the goalposts, as it were, and puts the bead onto the observation of order itself. Losing the certain blessings of the Erdtree's sacred tears, followers of the Elden Ring will now work to justify the fate themselves, through study of the Golden Order itself that the Elden Ring describes. A once blind worship of the Erdtree, merely in response to the boons it provided, is no longer enough. That Marika's followers must not falter in their faith simply because their days of easy grace, with which the faith of the Erdtree itself had been first spread across the lands between, are over. Also, just to confirm, Radagon is not implied in the game to be the creator of Golden Order fundamentalism. Indeed, Radagon's Rings of Light is in the Golden Order Principia, a tomb containing the Order's fundamental principles, but recall what the incantation's description actually says. A gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father Radagon. Gratitude for what? The Discus of Light incantation that Miquella made as a gift for Radagon. Obviously, Radagon's Ring of Light was composed after Miquella's Discus of Light, and since Discus of Light is itself already a fundamentalist incantation, it shows that Radagon is not implied to be the inventor of fundamentalism.
And I would disagree with that because Radagon's boss title plate is Golden Order, Radagon in Japanese, essentially. And certainly Miquella could have made certain incantations that embodied the Golden Order, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Miquella is also implied to be the creator of Golden Order fundamentalism.
To be clear, that isn't integral to anything, but I just thought it would be worth specifying. Maybe it would confuse the timeline in the future otherwise, when new content is eventually released. Fundamentalism came out of the need to propagandize the Golden Order, and somehow excuse its otherwise equally observable shortcomings. Golden Order fundamentalists sought to find, in science and mathematics, adequate justifications for what they'd already decided had to be correct. This premise is confirmed beyond a doubt should we follow Goldmask and Corrin on his journey to compose the Mending Rune of Perfect Order, during which we learn alongside Goldmask and Corrin that the Golden Order in its entirety had been founded on a, dare I say, fundamental lie.
The Golden Order is founded on the principle that Marika is the one true god. However, the name of Marika's second husband, King Consort Radagon, also appeared.
Scholarship in all but name, Golden Order fundamentalism was created solely to justify that no matter what and despite everything, square pegs did fit into round holes. Since the Golden Order itself is supposed to be perfect, you could almost say they had no choice but to make it that way. Practically speaking, though,
I didn't quite follow what she was saying there, and that's probably like no fault of hers as much as it is like my expectations were just subverted. So I might have like gotten a bit ahead of myself in my head. So let me just re-listen to that, because, yeah.
Radagon also appeared.
Scholarship in all but name, Golden Order fundamentalism was created solely to justify that no matter what and despite everything, square pegs did fit into round holes. Since the
Okay, so I think in TLGTW's mind here, from what she said earlier, that Marika was telling her comrades to just kind of believe blindly. That's supposed to be kind of at the root of Golden Order fundamentalism, which I think is just a really mistaken perspective of things, because in my mind, Marika is very, very clearly saying that they need to apply understanding to grace to further the boon of its blessings. So grace exists, but blind belief doesn't get you the full bounty of the grace. So you need to look at it from a new perspective, the Golden Order fundamentalism, which I would argue ties into all of the Radagon stuff with Renala and Raya Lucaria, and integrating his Elden Rune into the Elden Ring with like the crosshatch pattern that appears on like the Raya Lucaria barrier and the thorns that prevent us from accessing the Erdtree. So Elden Enthusiast says there's a distinction between the Golden Order and Golden fundamentalism, right? So this is going to be a very contentious topic. I am of the opinion that there is no distinction between the Golden Order and Golden Order fundamentalism, and that the Rune of Death was sealed upon Godfrey being banished from the lands between and Radagon ascending the throne of Elden Lord, with other things like Malekith, sealing the rune away. Like there's probably a lot going on in a very short time span there. But others would say that the Rune of Death must have been sealed with Godfrey and Marika defeating the giants and kind of creating the birth of the Erd Tree in their era. So that's just going to be a kind of fundamental agree/disagree moment between individuals, essentially. Drew says, they feel like one day an Elden Ring lore tuber will basically get the lore as close to right as it could be intended by the creators, and there will still be a huge logic holes because they're baked in. Yeah. Definitely. Crow says that you're not sure if it's fallacious or not. The only objection to her point you can think of is that the Principia might not have been the founding Golden Order fundamentalist text. It could have been codifying its ideas later on. So, are you replying to like Teen Sith specifically with like the fallacious logic? I forgot exactly the context of it at the time. And also, welcome back to the stream, Crow. Alright, so I don't remember if I like actually finished my point there. Let me square pegs into round holes. Alright, so fully understanding the grace, increasing its blessing. I did talk about that. I think I've said all I wanted to. And then I'm going to stop in 5 seconds when I actually remember.
Golden Order itself is supposed to be perfect. You could almost say they had no choice but to make it that way. Practically speaking, though, the Order itself is one of complete authoritarian control. As the fundamentalists described it, the Golden Order is supposed to be an order that encompasses the destruction of things, regression, and the creating of things, causality. And by this, we see how the fundamentalists justify their obsession with deciding what fit within the order and what should exist, and what...
I don't necessarily think it's fair to say that regression is destruction, although I can understand where they're coming from with that. I think Immutable Shield uses regression. Yeah. Not that this really matters that much. So Immutable Shield says, two concepts form the basis for Golden Order fundamentalism. One is the law of regression, to which this incantation relates. So it's not specifically death as much as it is just reversion, perhaps. So
what was heretically outside the order and therefore shouldn't. Anything that didn't fit in the Golden Order's preconceptions were determined to, in simple terms, be existing incorrectly, and thus to be eradicated, like those who live in death. Not only, however, is the Golden Order in its entirety revealed to be predicated on a lie, but over the course of the game, multiple examples in-universe address how what the Golden Order proclaimed as heresy have only ever been completely arbitrary.
So, okay, that was the other thing that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to back it up 30 seconds or whatnot. That whatever didn't fit into the Golden Order's preconceptions were determined to be bad or whatever TLGTW said, I think is a half-truth because of a misunderstanding between what I believe TLGTW would talk about with the computer programming parallel and the programmers themselves. If you program a computer and run the code, it will do exactly what you say, but it may not be exactly what you expect. And I'm sure if anybody has any familiarity with that, coding in general, they'll understand what I mean here. But the hunters like D think the Golden Order should be one way, but their beliefs about the Golden Order don't actually shape what that truly means, which is where we get Goldmask's disagreement with Marika and why he wants the Golden Order to become perfect by removing the gods' control over it. So the Golden Order is perfect in the idea that 1 + 1 is the same as 1 + 1. That's a perfect equation, but if you think 1 plus 1 should be like equal to 2, they're similar ideas, but technically like different equations. But anyway, that's a terrible example perhaps, but there was nothing wrong with the Golden Order. It was just that Marika's beliefs didn't align with reality, and so she chose to alter reality, then accept the so-called like grave that or like the hole she's been digging for herself. And yeah, so to speak back to Crow's point and Teensith's point, because she pointed it out, that according to TLGTW's logic, they were saying that Radigan should not be considered the genesis of the Golden Order fundamentalism because Miquella's creation of an incantation exists. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that Radigan's Rings of Light was the first Golden Order fundamentalist like thought paradigm to exist ever. So it is kind of fallacious, but yeah. And the fact that you're saying that the Golden Order Principia could be the founding text is the fallacy, because that has not actually been proven. So you're just working off an assumption there. Did the math wrong, but got the right answer. So it's kind of the same math, like when I made my silly example of 1 plus 1 equals 1 plus 1 versus 1 plus 1 equals 2. I mean, there's 2 on both sides. It's just like different ways of writing it. So what do I think happens in Goldmask's ending? So I haven't had very strong thoughts on it for a long time, so this is kind of more of a recent development in my mind, is that Goldmask will make it so that the Elden Ring cannot be mended again or broken again. So that way it'll stop gods from meddling with it, and that'll make the Golden Order the only thing that can ever be in the future. Yeah, I don't necessarily think it removes free will, which I was wondering about for a while. But anyway.
To, in simple terms, be existing incorrectly, and thus to be eradicated, like those who live in death. Not only, however, is the Golden Order in its entirety revealed to be predicated on a lie, but over the course of the game, multiple examples in-universe address how what the Golden Order proclaimed as heresy have only ever been completely arbitrary. The Liurnians were heretical, but now they're not. The Crucible wasn't heretical, but now it is. The Golden Order has no mercy for those who trespass beyond life's bounds. You know, except for us. When Muriel tells us heresy is not native to this world, it is merely a contrivance, all things can be conjoined and all that, he is in fact correct. The story itself agrees with him, and this observation is indeed one of the main morals espoused by the game itself, that the concept of heresy is inherently fake. We can even find Muriel's premise proven to its utmost if we follow Fia's questline, and upon repairing the Elden Ring with the mending rune of the Death Prince, we embed the principle of life within death into the Elden Ring's order. Now unanimous, its contrivance as an existence outside the bounds of the previous order becomes observably defunct. Just like that, this ideology of the Age of the Duskborn is established, and through the powers of the Elden Ring, magically made into reality.
So, I don't know if I've talked about this on stream recently, maybe yesterday or something along those lines, but maybe it's today even. I think the way that Fia's ending here works is kind of similar to the other endings in that it disconnects the dead from the Erd Tree because it codifies those who live in death into being, and Marika may have been more concerned with keeping life flowing into her Erd Tree than the Golden Order itself. So, just to kind of rephrase that, when Deathroot came into the Lands Between, it stopped souls from returning to the Erd Tree through its roots because those souls would contact the Deathroot and then they'd want to live again, and so they just kind of possess like skeletons, and so you have the undead everywhere. However, when Erd Tree burial was a thing before Deathroot, the souls would go back to the Erd Tree, which is why we have like the Catacombs ghost telling us proper death means returning to the Erd Tree. Just wait, one day like the roots will call for you. Something along those lines between like the English and the Japanese there. It's not like super important. So if those who live in death become part of the Order, that, in my mind, would mean that the dead don't actually have to return to the Erd Tree, and it kind of makes the Erd Tree irrelevant in that version of the Order. Goldmask's ending might be kind of similar because the cat's already been let out of the bag, but those who live in death aren't exactly against the principles of the Order. They're just kind of against the principles of the Erd Tree, if that makes sense. And kind of the same thing with Dung Eater, where he wants to prevent death from going to the Erd Tree and the Erd Tree absorbing its nutrients, so everybody will be cursed and removed from the Erd Tree. And over time, the curse will become a blessing, because once everything is cursed, the curse is a curse no longer. And then, obviously, the Age of Fracture is just kind of a return to the status quo. Kolo asks, what does that mean for us Elden Lords? What would be the best ending for us in terms of authority? In terms of authority, it would definitely be Goldmask, because nothing could come after you to replace you, perhaps. You've wondered if unalloyed gold still falls within the Golden Order. So, yeah, you could potentially make the argument that you could still produce unalloyed gold, but Miquella's issue with unalloyed gold and the Golden Order is that it doesn't actually stop Scarlet Rot, and my opinion on that is because death isn't in the cycle, and without death to stop decay, it'll just continue to grow like a cancer. Unalloyed has too many syllable, pure gold feels better. No, Miquella would definitely not be in agreement with Goldmask because he wants to free his sister from the clutches of Scarlet Rot, and the Golden Order fundamentalist stuff doesn't allow that to happen. But good questions. Alright, Teen Sith, you have a good night. Take care.
Established, and through the powers of the Elden Ring, magically made into reality. The Golden Order was the vision of order that was written into the Elden Ring prior to its destruction. As I described earlier, what I refer to as these visions of order are, in other words, physical transcriptions of an ideology that can be given by its envisioner to be magically enforced by an Empyrean in their ascension to godhood. Malenia holds the Scarlet Rot inside her, and from her was established an Order of Rot. Mohg attempted to ascend Miquella unto godhood by putting his accursed blood inside him, and from him he aspired to establish his Mohgwyn dynasty. And, of course, Queen Marika held the Elden Ring inside her, and from her was established the Golden Order. So note that where we talk about Empyreans being vessels, it's in physical terms. The nature of this link, however, between an ascended Empyrean themselves and the vision of order that they're physically vessel for is shown to be a very magically powerful connection. From Marika, we of course see that the damaging of the Elden Ring shattered her own body in return, but we also see that Marika's body had become transmuted in a less destructive way as well, as Radagon bleeds golden sap when we strike him. This magical link is also shown to run both ways, for after we do kill Marika and her Elden Ring in the final boss fight, Godslain and all that, if we choose to repair the ring, the way we do it is by repairing Marika's body, bringing her and subsequently the ring back to life. This is also why the permanent removal of the Elden Ring's influence in the other two endings share a depiction of Marika's head being destroyed, removing any chance of her being put back together again. Marika's death and subsequently the Elden Ring's death are now both made permanent. This relationship between Marika and the Elden Ring is a direct effect of how she became a god by ascending as the Elden Ring's vessel. While the Elden Ring has power over her, she has a very direct power over it in turn. With her death, necessarily comes its death. This ultimate power she retained over the Golden Order was exactly what Marika refers to as well when she mocks Radagon in the echoes Melina recounts in Marika's bedchamber.
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both, mine other self.
To start with the end, in regards to what Marika is talking about in the bedchamber dialogue, and in regards to the red-haired hero himself, Radagon is Marika, continuous present tense. Like the statue says, and as Corrin's questline explains, Radagon existed as a magical offshoot of Queen Marika the Eternal, made through the powers of the Golden Order. He was created at some point prior to the Liurnian Wars, where the rest of his story is known, up until the point of Marika shattering the Elden Ring. There are several disparate parts in the game leading directly to the player discovering that Radagon and Marika were, in truth, only one entity all along. Those being Muriel questioning why he was chosen as second Elden Lord, despite being apparently just a mortal champion, and rumors of the statue in Leyndell, Melania's remembrance in Great Rune, and Goldmask's questline, which requires you to unveil the secret of the statue and report it back to Corrin. Radagon's true nature is most observably expressed, however, in the spoken echoes of Marika's bedchamber, and in the game's final boss itself, where we actually fight him. First of all, it's worth pointing out that the bedchamber dialogue directly precedes the event of the breaking of the Elden Ring. I know it's obvious, but this is important to note because it shows beyond a doubt that before the shattering, Radagon and Marika existed as two physically separate bodies. They are spoken echoes, after all, of Marika speaking to Radagon, so along with the dialogue itself, you can tell that they...
Yeah, I just strongly disagree with that, because if we look at another parallel example, I always say that, not really, but Melina can exist within our body and she can talk to us, but she's still kind of her own separate being. So I don't necessarily think there's anything concrete to say that they had two separate bodies and all that. Let me just back it up a little bit more.
Spoken echoes of Marika's bedchamber, and in the game's final boss itself, where we actually fight him. First of all, it's worth pointing out that the bedchamber dialogue directly precedes the event of the breaking of the Elden Ring. I know it's obvious, but this is important to note because it shows beyond a doubt that before the shattering, Radagon and Marika existed as two physically separate bodies. They are spoken echoes, after all, of Marika speaking to Radagon, so along with the dialogue itself, we can tell that they haven't gotten to their Mephistopheles and Margareta situation just yet. That they both exist as separate bodies also corroborates with, of course, Radagon's past as the leader of the Lyrian Wars and a husband to Queen Renala, during which Marika still remained publicly active.
So part of the reason why I disagree with the premises here is if you want to say that Marika and Radagon are separate bodies, then that would contradict the idea that Miquella and Merlania were born of a quote-unquote single-person god, in my opinion meaning like a one-body god, because Radagon isn't divine himself, as evidenced by like the Carian children not being considered demigods until he wed Marika, technically. So anyway, Drew said, you feel like in general the Elden Ring audience has rejected the idea that Radagon and Marika literally switched back and forth because it seems too sitcom silly? Yeah, I agree that that's probably how like a lot of people feel, but we don't have anything concrete enough for me to believe otherwise just yet. I don't think it's out of the question, but I think people might just be getting ahead of themselves. Because a lot of people are like, oh, well, what was Marika doing in Leyndell if Radagon was off elsewhere? Well, Marika doesn't actually have to be anywhere else, and she is known for her quote-unquote mischief and transforming into other things. And that might be a kind of like hint that she was transforming between herself and Radagon. We don't really know. Radagon is Marika, but in what capacity? As far as the Japanese goes, it's more along the lines that like Marika is Radagon in terms of like the being known as Radagon comes from Marika, essentially. Morgott can project himself. Why couldn't Marika? That's a good question as well. Yeah, especially because, like, yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I'll need to steal it for my own.
Shown by her speeches at the Grand Lift of Dectus and the churches in Limgrave and the Weeping Peninsula. So we can put down for certain that prior to the Shattering, while the Elden Ring was fully formed, Radagon and Marika were two separate people. Then, as we see in the paintings of the game's opening movie, and as explained by the description of Marika's hammer, the Elden Ring is broken by Marika, before Radagon takes control over Marika's body and immediately attempts to repair it. We see clearly that the fusion between Marika and Radagon, where they now share a single body, becomes present at this point. Where the Elden Ring has been partly destroyed, Marika and Radagon share a single body. And then when we finally...
And again, just to reiterate my points over and over, I think that gets contradicted by Miquella and Melania being the child of a single-person god.
We beat the final boss, and then stand in front of a dead Marika, we see that Radagon is nowhere. Initially, he took form over his and Marika's shared body to fight us, but there's only one person here now. Even if we decide to repair the Elden Ring, resurrecting Marika to do so, Radagon remains absent, with our Tarnished freely taking his spot as the new Elden Lord. Of the Golden Order was putting it lightly. As we see, Radagon's physicality was directly connected to the cohesion of the Golden Order itself, and it was this fact that Marika refers to when she taunts Radagon in her bedchamber.
So Titan says, explain the last boss fight then. We kill Radagon and then the Elden Beast turns him into a sword. To be fair, the Elden Beast and like the Elden Ring itself is in the black mist, and that black mist leaves Radagon's body to transform it. And it's not as though you can see Marika's body just chilling off on the side while we do our boss fight. So I think after we destroy that which is Radagon, it reverts back to Marika, because Radagon is Marika, and or vice versa. Elden Enthusiast does wonder, why disguise yourself as a champion to fight Liurnia, especially since the Ogre Shield says she killed the Fell God, saying she can scrap it if she wants to. No. She does not actually kill the Fell God. That is listed as a belief. Let's go ahead and pull that stuff up. One-Eyed Shield, I think. Yeah, so it's the One-Eyed Shield. So once worshipped by the giants, this evil deity is believed to have been slain by Queen Marika. And then we're going to type in Fell Giant. That might help me. Fell God. That'll be good enough. Flame of the Fell God. The Fell God still lurks within the giants. So if she killed the god, it still exists. And either way, that would mean the shield's description is kind of a bit of a moot point, all things considered. So I believe the Fell God lurks within the fire giants, the last giant with the flame itself. I'm pretty sure the Fell God is in the flame, kind of like the god of Scarlet Rot is the Lake of Rot, potentially. You think Elden Beast separates Radagon and Marika when it turns Radagon into a sword? And that's a possibility too, because if Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, you could say that like that's her. But we're never shown with the two actually having like separate bodies. So the question, going back to what Elden Enthusiast brought up earlier, why disguise herself as a champion to fight Liurnia? Maybe because she wanted to get on the inside of Rennala, so that way she could understand sorceries and incorporate that into the Golden Order. That idea to understand their grace, which is pretty much exactly what happens when Radagon becomes Elden Lord. He does mend the Elden Ring because we get Radagon's Elden Rune put into the ring, the crosshatch pattern, and from that point on, the fate in the night skies is governed by the Elden Ring, whereas it was not earlier because the Carian royal family's fate was governed by the stars. And so the Elden Ring didn't necessarily control them. And depending on how you feel about the Liurnian Wars, Marika's forces were actually kind of beaten and driven back in the first campaign. And it was in the second one that she returned because she probably felt like Rennala had something worth taking.
Thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
In my opinion, it hardly gets more explicit than mine other self, but if you assume that this was Marika merely calling Radagon by an affectionate term, don't worry, because this is only the second pet name she gives him. The first one, as we hear, is Loyal Dog.
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order.
In the original Japanese, she doesn't even zhuzh it up with fancy words. She literally calls Radagon an Inu, dog of the Golden Order, so it's safe to say that this is Marika being sarcastic.
That's even more pedantic than I would argue, because like hound means dog. That's not really different. Anyway, like I'll let them continue.
Script making use of a double entendre. Anyhow, it was this aspect of the Elden Ring's destruction that Marika taunted Radagon with. that the end of the Golden Order necessitated Radagon's end, besides hers. You might even say she was mocking him for being ultimately powerless to stop her. Indeed, even as Radagon would try to repair the Elden Ring and block all entrance to the Erdtree, as we see from Radagon's seal being over the impenetrable thorns, this was exactly what Marika knew he would do. Besides simply accepting his death and giving Marika what she wanted at once, it was Radagon's only option. This was also what Marika hinged her entire plan on in her creation of the Tarnished Quest. As her spoken echoes at the capital outskirts reveal, Marika had always known that from her absence, the lands between would be sullied by conflict within the vacuum.
Hear me, demigods. My children, beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god.
And yet she also knew the Shardbearer's stalemate was inevitable, for as Morgoth first discovered, even after ostensibly winning the Shattering, by taking his place as Lord of the Royal Capital as the eldest of the Golden Lineage, defending Leyndell so well that its walls never fell even once, and maintaining the Golden Order's presence all the way up to the fringes of Limgrave over the course of the entire Shattering.
Alright, so one thing that I want to mention is, well, I didn't necessarily think this was kind of a big deal. I guess it does come up quite a lot in the whole idea of Marika referring to Radagon as her other self. That might make it sound like that idea of self is a bit more complete than what's in the Japanese script. Well, semantically, I think it's virtually the same to say like Radagon is her other self. The term that it comes from is Hanshin, and Hanshin literally just kind of means like half body, or like half self. It doesn't really matter. That's just kind of more semantics. But this term does show up in a couple other places, mostly relating to Latenna, where she calls her wolf her other self, and that's kind of in the item description itself. So what is it called in here? Her beloved wolf companion, Lobo. So she does call him like her better half directly. So this is Hanshin right here. Let's go ahead and turn this on for you guys. I don't think it's going to give us like a one-word thing. Yeah, the half the body, half length. So it doesn't necessarily mean like a complete other self, which I think is what some people might be interpreting from the English there. Mighty shot doesn't really matter. So yeah, this is Marika's lines. Let's shatter the Elden Ring, my other half. And then this is Alexander. Like I got my lower half stuck, and just to make that clearer, lower half of the body. This first character is like the character for below or the bottom. So the bottom half of myself is stuck, which isn't to say like Alexander is split, but it's figurative language and literal language sometimes. It's still Alexander. So the next stuff should be Latenna. Okay, so this is Latenna stuff right here. She says, was my other half not enough? So that's Lobo. That's her Hanshin right here. So like, you stole my other half. You know? So, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't really show up in a ton of other places, but I don't know like how strongly people have been interpreting that, so I figured I might as well address it. Tyler says, would it be a stretch to say that Marika/Radagon is Rebus, an alchemical fusion of male and female? I don't necessarily know, because like the male part should technically come from Marika to begin with. So I don't know exactly how well that works in within the allegory of alchemy to begin with. But yeah. What's the difference between semantics and pedantics? Semantics is typically more oriented towards language, and pedantics doesn't have to be language specifically, as far as I'm aware, but I might be wrong. All right, Drew, you have a good night, man. All right, let's go back to the video.
After all of that, he would be spurned by the Erdtree too. He couldn't have done anything but be spurned by the Erdtree. As we face ourselves when we finally get there, and as the two fingers in the round table hold learn, Radagon refused to let anybody inside. Forcing the two fingers, who directly served under the greater will itself, and self-evidently seeking only that the Elden Ring be repaired, to end up with no other choice but to call back us Tarnished that Marika banished long ago as a last resort to break the stalemate. that Marika specifically made preparations for, the personal enslavement of Hugh to craft a weapon able to kill her, Melna's original purpose that she relearns upon our going to Leyndell of being kindling for the first cardinal sin, and the betrayal of Malekith as mentioned in his remembrance, of a tarnished eventually killing him in order to retrieve destined death and return it to the Elden Ring, despite locking away destined death having been his original singular purpose. When we eventually see Marika for ourselves, the return of the Rune of Death takes the form of her being impaled by a fragment of it going through her torso with a matching wound in the belly of the Elden Beast. The Rune of Death undoes...
I know Tarnished Archaeologist got a lot of flack for that claim, although I guess he said that it came from Malekith specifically, but I don't think it's really that outlandish to suggest that Malekith would have been the one to have stabbed her with destined death, because he should have been the only one that controlled it, unless Marika stole it for herself and then stabbed herself. Maybe that's actually a way to look at it, and then... Anyway, I'll leave that alone. I won't go into the super speculation there. Titanhead asked, you gotta think, why wouldn't Rykard and Radahn be Empyreans? If Marika and Radagon are always one body, that would mean Radahn and Rykard would be Empyreans. So that's a good question, and the explanation that comes down to, at least for me, is that Radagon is not Marika and he's not a god, as she tells him, which is why the Carian children aren't considered demigods until Radagon marries Marika. At least in a legal sense, probably even a literal sense. It's arguably vague, but frustrating nonetheless. And then, what were you saying? Oh yeah, as far as TLGTW's worldview, they haven't really set up why we should believe that Radagon had children with Rennala, resulting in Rykard and Radahn, and why Ranni is separate, other than the fact of Ranni being an Empyrean. So, yeah, we don't know what order the Carian children were actually born in. What I said isn't logical, respectfully. Do you want to elaborate? That because Radagon is not a god on his own, that that Ranni... Whatever I said. So yeah, it's not really my logic, so to speak, but whatever Marika seems to do is that when she ever goes into her Radagon form, he's not technically divine the exact same way she is. Which I do think is problematic when we consider how Miquella and Melania are the product of a single person god. However, their births are kind of messed up because of the self-cest. It's kind of implied. Would I agree that Radagon's quest for completion could be tied in his quest to become a god or to become Marika? Potentially, yeah. I don't know if he necessarily always wanted to become a god. He might have wanted to become his own person that was complete away from Marika, and he might have tried to use the rebirthing rune. We don't really know, though. I have wondered whether or not, him getting the baptism of the celestial dew kind of fried up his circuits, and that kind of made him his own being that was more independent from Marika, but I don't really know. Makes you wonder if the demigod is just a title, or hold on, let me do this, or if they gained any power from being deemed demigods. Yeah, it's really up in the air, isn't it? So Titan says, Radahn and Rykard would be an Empyrean if what I said is true. You said Ranni is an Empyrean because Radagon is one god. So, sorry, I might have misspoke. So, in my opinion, Ranni is an Empyrean, and it has nothing to do with her being a singular child of Radagon and Marika, which I disagreed with TLGTW pretty much towards the beginning when they first said that. However, in TLGTW's worldview, Ranni must be an Empyrean, or must be the product of Radagon and Marika because she's an Empyrean, which is something I fundamentally disagree with. So why is Ronnie an Empyrean in my worldview? Because she was chosen by the Two Fingers, according to her own dialogue. What makes me think Radigan wants to be independent of America? Just the fact that his goals don't actually, like, his will doesn't align with America's will at the end of him repairing the thing that she shattered. If Radigan is truly America, then their will should be the same thing, right? I mean, they are arguably different to a degree, and that's kind of some of the pain in trying to parse through Elden Ring's lore here. He's got that dog in him, yeah. Why did the Fingers choose Ronnie? That's a good question, and all I can do is shrug audibly. All right, waiting for any extra replies before we go back to the video for a little bit, and then I also want to check out some of the comments on the video. Colo says, it's another conspiracy theory, but do we hear anyone saying that Ronnie is an Empyrean other than her vassals who are her allies and servants? We have very little information about Empyreans in general. I don't remember if anything explicitly calls her an Empyrean, but at the very least, the way that she becomes the next age's god goes along with what Gallery talks about with Mikola and Melania. Oh, and then there's also the fact that if Marika was an Empyrean who was given a shadowbound beast, Ronnie also has a shadowbound beast, so that could be another good connection to give support to that claim. Doesn't India call Ronnie an Empyrean? Maybe? I don't remember. No, I don't think Ronnie's lying. So, Morlor says, Godfrey is the first demigod, right? The first ever? Yes, technically. And you could make the argument the reason he is a demigod is because he is Marika's consort, her first husband, and his case of becoming a demigod hopefully isn't because he's like the son of Marika, somehow, and that could also help explain why the Rykard and Radahn Great Runes say they became demigod stepchildren when Radigan wed Marika. Do Melania and Mikola have shadows? If so, we do not see them. I mean, Melania calls herself the shadow of Mikola, I think. Maybe not. But at the very least, if they don't have shadows, my rationale for Mikola and Melania lacking a shadow is because they're technically born Empyreans, whereas the other Empyreans may need to be chosen, like Ronnie and or Marika and or the Glowmide Queen. Have no demigods ever existed before Godfrey? You don't know about that one. According to the text, no, I'm pretty sure not. Godfrey, let me pull up the thing. I think it's a Godric's Great Rune. Yeah. Well, I guess technically it's ambiguous in the English. Let me look at the Japanese. Actually, oh, no, okay, never mind. There's a connector there. All right, so in the Japanese, so the English is kind of ambiguous where it says, like, the first demigods were the Elden Lord Godfrey and his offspring, but, I mean, you need Godfrey to make the offspring so that they all become demigods at the same time. I doubt that. The Japanese is, like, the Elden Lord Godfrey and his children, the golden lineage, were the first demigods. So the English is pretty much exactly on track with the Japanese. So if you want to make the argument that they all became demigods at the same time, you'd also have to say which demigods those were. And we have like Godwyn, Morgoth, and Mohg to work with. So I don't think it's unfair to say that Godfrey is the first demigod. But I guess it isn't quite that explicit, to be fair. The twins do not have shadows, nor does Millennia say she's a shadow. So where are their shadows? In the DLC, indeed. Okay. Alright, I'll watch a couple more minutes of this, then I will go into their comments just to see like what they're corrected and like what Crunchy had to say and all that.
Of it going through her torso with a matching wound in the belly of the Elden Beast. The Rune of Death undoes the Erd Tree's grace-given immortality, just like she witnessed the Black Knives do for Godwyn, allowing the brambles to be burnt away and for her and the Elden Ring her body sustained to finally be killed in the first place. Thus was the end goal that the shattering itself and all of its carnage had been designed to lead up to. Indeed, such was the purpose behind Marika's creation of the Tarnished from the very beginning.
Ah, I knew you'd come.
Are you having second thoughts? Might I have a word, then? Your kind are meant to challenge them. To slay them. The demigods and their god.
So slay her with the weapons he smithed. Slay the god Marika, who cursed us all.
I commend your spirit, but alas, none shall take the throne. Queen Marika has high hopes for us, that we continue to struggle. Unto eternity. A man cannot kill a god.
How did Marika and Radagon know such a specific event would come to pass, though? That with the Golden Order's destruction, Radagon would himself be destroyed in as specific a way as refusing with Marika, all with enough surety that Marika was comfortable taunting him with it. Taking a step back, we're able to see precisely how, from how the fundamentalists themselves chose to describe the powers of the Golden Order, that one of the two incantations in the Golden Order Principia. You didn't forget that it's the law of regression in the first place that's used to reveal Radagon's true nature, did you? If, as has been the most common alternate theory amongst the fandom, that Radagon was once a completely separate person, and was instead magically incorporated into Marika just before the Liurnian Wars, then as the law of regression dictates, with the destruction of the Golden Order that made him as he is, he'd have returned to his original mortal form, whoever he was prior to being known as Radagon of the Golden Order. Instead, he is eradicated completely. Reveals mimicry in all its forms. Now, God slain, the man has returned to whence he came. Radagon was. That's why the Sacred Relic Sword, which we see with our own eyes was made from Radagon after we defeat him in the first phase, is nonetheless described as a sword wrought from the body of Marika instead. It's what the Radagon icon description foreshadows when it tells us the hero aspired to be complete.
So yeah, the Sacred Relic Sword description is a little bit strange, and I do agree to an extent that it does sound like it really should be talking about the remains of Marika. So you could say like, oh, Radagon is Marika, I guess is one way to interpret that. Or you could say that it is the remains of the Elden Beast itself, because you do get the whole like God slain text that appears at the end of the fight. But if it is supposed to be the Elden Beast itself, does the Elden Beast grab itself to strike us? That becomes a bit more arguable. So for what it's worth, I don't necessarily think it's supposed to say like Radagon was actually the god, but I also can't really, in good faith, completely deny others from coming to that conclusion.
It's described as a sword wrought from the body of Marika instead. It's what the Radagon icon description foreshadows when it tells us the hero aspired to be complete. For despite being, evidently, an individual with his own free will, Radagon was never a complete person. He was simply a separated piece of someone else. It's why Radagon's name was present in the Golden Order itself as well, as Goldmask was able to notice in his study of it. And, of course, it's how Radagon's children with Rennala still also counted as the direct offspring of Marika, inheriting great runes and justifying the presence of the Golden Sewing Needle, a tool for the tailoring of demigod attire specifically as one of Radagon's initial wedding gifts. Well,
Yeah, and to be fair, I'm pretty sure the only thing that says that the demigods are the direct children of America comes from Aenea's dialogue. And while I don't think like Aenea tries to lie, she might not have the full truth, arguably. But anyway, there could be a little bit of room to make the argument that they aren't, which I don't really think changes too much anyway. I'm just saying that so that others may have like a better understanding of the full picture. Is she slowing the game audio? It might be part of why the video is so long. Not necessarily. They're not slowing the audio, I don't believe. It's just like they do have a couple bit of like awkward gaps between some of the text, but no, it's just like a very long topic apparently. Part of the reason why the video is so long is because we're talking so much about it.
Well before his epic divorce and return to Leyndell. Now, you may recall the description of the giant's red braid, where it appears to potentially imply that Radagon might have actually been one of the fire giants. This, however, is a misconception, one that came from the word choice of the English translation. The JP description spells it out more clearly. We're told by the Barrier of Gold incantation that it was only during the First and Second Liurnian Wars that Radagon...
Oh, they just kind of rushed over that quickly, huh? Hold on, I'll read it for you guys.
The JP...
So, it is said that Radagon's own red hair brought him despair. Was it because of the curse of the giants? So yeah, that's pretty good. Look, like translation there. Yeah. So what this is saying is that Radagon's hair could have been red because the giants cursed him, rather than saying that the reason his hair is red is because he's a giant. If that makes sense.
JP description spells it out more clearly. We're told by the Barrier of Gold incantation that it was only during the First and Second Liurnian Wars that Radagon fought for the Erdtree, and since a Giant Crusher weapon confirms beyond a doubt that the War of the Giants was the very first war fought by the Golden Order, along with the complete absence of anything even related to Radagon on the mountaintops, we see that Radagon had never even been present for the War of the Giants.
That's not necessarily fair, it just shows that he may not have had a large enough role. Well, I don't necessarily know if he was born around here. It doesn't really matter too much because it's not like we're told about Moog or Godwyn or some of these other beings who should have been like present during these times.
So, at the item description itself wonders, how could Radagon have been cursed? As we've just gone over, it's because Radagon is Marika's very literal other self. Some form of lesser manifestation of her that was eventually returned back to whence he came when the magic that facilitated his existence was destroyed. The curse of his red hair had actually merely been cast onto Marika instead, being the instigator of the fire giant genocide in the first place, physically present at the battles themselves, as her speech at the First Church of Marika confirmed, and personally marking a fire giant with a curse of her own. The originators of Radagon's curse already had an ample opportunity to do so. Thus, on Radagon's creation, he indirectly catches the red hair curse, and it manifests on him the same way it appears in Radagon's own children, and in Melina. That's why the narrator brings the topic up with so much ambiguity in the first place.
So to be fair, it doesn't necessarily have to go in that order of events. So Marika herself could have been cursed by the giants, and with her kind of divine powers, she may have just localized that curse onto a part of her body, her soul or whatnot, and then fractured it so like she wasn't cursed directly. But you know, that's also taking liberties on my end there, just to show that there's other possibilities at play.
Radagon was indeed the victim of a curse. It's just not his curse. As we observed, the red hair had spread magically through their victims' genetics, in more physical terms, through their shared blood. Just like how Moog's blood flame appears in Morgoth, despite Morgoth himself obviously having no willing connection to the Formless Mother, the magical power that Moog's blood had become imbued with was spread to all who shared that blood, meaning the followers of his dynasty who imbibed his blood and his twin brother. With Radagon and Marika counting genetically as the same being, of course, the curse is able to manifest on him just as well as it does on Ranni and Melina. And in the case of her permanent destruction when we choose the Lord of Chaos ending, we see that the red in Melina's own hair has faded just like the gold in her right eye. Indeed, I'd go so far as to say that it's clear that the red hair curse had always been from Queen Marika. However, as for how Marika herself and Miquella evidently lack red hair, as we see by several depictions of Marika and the single painting of Miquella we see in his opening cutscene, well, there isn't anything for it just yet.
That's fair, and also rip. So yeah, that was something that I was going to bring up, that Mikola has blonde hair, which is kind of really interesting and doesn't make a ton of sense if Radagon's red hair gets transmitted to his children. But to be fair, I also don't think that the curse of the fire giants is what necessarily created like the scarlet rot to appear in Melania, or Mikola to be cursed by like boundless youth. All right. So this, I think, is a pretty good stopping point. I'm going to like maybe listen a couple seconds and then like back up if there's nothing too significant after this.
For Mikola, at least, note how, besides the single frame, there is literally nothing else in the game that shows Mikola's hair color. Indeed, I think it would even be very preemptive of us to assume he was born that way. I would bet, even, that if anyone would know about banishing a curse, it'd be him. Time will tell us in time, after all, so if it turns out I'm wrong, and it's revealed that Mikola actually was born with blonde hair, I'm en route to a massive egg on my face.
Alright, so that's an interesting thought. I do kind of like it that Mikola could have had a curse and then like removed it. Maybe you could explain that going along with him kind of turning into a more adult form in the cocoon thing, but at the very least, he did have a curse for a long time as a child, so I don't know how well that works. Okay, so that will stop the video there for tonight. If you guys do want me to watch it tomorrow, let me know. If you don't want me to watch it tomorrow, let me know, and then I might change plans and switch to a different video. So, going down over here, I'm going to read Crunchy's stuff first and then TLGTW's. So Crunchy says, fantastic video. You covered a lot of the same things they've talked about before, only more logically and eloquently, as well as some stuff that Crunchy had never considered. They have a couple thoughts. 1. The initial explanation of magic system and imagination and the greater will is excellent, but they'd also suggest that they apply Occam's razor. There's no need for the greater will to have existed as a prior causal force to the magic system. If imagination and belief manifest directly in reality, the greater will could just be the result of faith itself. This would also line up with the Jungian idea of the collective unconsciousness, which influenced Berserk and by extension Elden Ring. Yeah, that's a good one. I also did really enjoy the kind of parallels that they were trying to make between like magic and faith and like energy and all that stuff. And so I was a bit more disappointed with the follow-on portions of the video, because I did think it started off pretty strongly, to be honest. Then Crunchy's number 2 is, there is in fact ambiguity in Millennia's remembrance in that it isn't exclusive. In other words, it's unambiguous that the twins were Empyreans because they were born of a single god, but that doesn't necessitate that all Empyreans are born of a single god. That would be a false syllogism. In any case, they found your thoughts on Rani and the egg completely convincing regardless. 3. After restricting yourself so strictly to canon, it struck them as odd that TLGTW would leap to the idea that Melina is a demigod and probably Empyrean. Curious to know your thoughts on that. You claimed the game say Radagon is an offshoot of America, but it doesn't say that. The point about the draconic tree sentinels, okay, I haven't gotten to that point yet. Okay. Great stuff. Crunchy is currently working on a script about the lore of the mechanics, and the way you put things has definitely helped them clarify some thoughts. We'll be shouting out that video. Once again, fantastic video. Okay, you guys want me to continue the video? Okay. You're not sure if you're loving it, but you're happy to be here either way. Have I ever covered any of the Brothers Codes videos? I don't think so. I think I've seen the name pop up, but yeah, I'm not sure. I'd need to look into it. So I'm going to assume no if I don't remember. No, I haven't covered Crunchy's latest video yet. I did hop in his stream for like the last 20 minutes, so I do have some ideas of what he talks about. And yeah, you should be able to see like my messages if he has like the replay up. But that is something that I did want to go over on this stream. But I kind of felt bad having so many videos by like Crunchy and Smotown, and so I'm trying to diversify our sources of lore. All right, so TLGTW does have some corrections on their videos. That what defines an Empyrean, how the game defines what an Empyrean is, will be reviewed in episode 2. I'll just use the first person. Well, I believe the other relevant topics might as well be background noise. It was dense of me to not at least refer to the so-called background noise to show that I hadn't simply forgotten about it. If you doubt my claims at the beginning of part 3, I hope you stick around for me to revisit the topic more properly. For the sake of future ease, however, I have made a write-out to account for each such background noise here as follows. 1. Millennia's Remembrance states that due to being the children of a single god, that she and Mikola are both Empyreans. Okay. Being the child of a single god is not the circumstance which results in becoming an Empyrean. It is the circumstance that is being an Empyrean. This will prove its own relevance later. Due to something that is not that's not directly named in the passage of the remembrance itself, that is specifically not being the children of a single god. Mikola and Melania suffered afflictions from birth. Millennia's Great Rune stating that the twin prodigies were born from Radigan and Marika reveals that this something was what resulted in Mikola and Melania's disabilities. How it does this is explained in the video itself. In Ansel River, Ronnie explains that only she, Mikola, and Melania were able to claim the title of Empyrean because because they were able to claim this title, which to recall was something that only those three were capable of doing, that after literally making herself unborn, as it so happens, Ronnie stops being capable of doing. The Two Fingers selected them as potential successors to Queen Marika, becoming the new god of the coming age. Millennia's Remembrance explains how the title of Empyrean is capable of being claimed. That's really weird. So they're saying that Ronnie was born an Empyrean, but after she killed herself, that the Two Fingers selected herself, which is just pretty bad because that kind of really contradicts Blythe being given to Ronnie early on by the Two Fingers. Hey, Nothingness, it's going. We're towards the end of the stream. I'm just reading some comments real quick before we end things up here. Why being an Empyrean was considered preliminary to becoming the god to succeed Marika, and how Ronnie was the only other demigod capable of claiming this title prior to the death of her body are also both as covered in the video. 5. The word unambiguous does not mean not confusing or obvious. When something is unambiguous, it means that it is not possible for more than one outcome to be true. The word objective does not mean most true or better than subjective. When something is objective, it means that it is something whose existence is not altered depending on the observer. In other words, objective is when something physically exists. Combining these meanings together is how they're able to say that the information presented by Millennia's Remembrance, that being an Empyrean is being the child of a single god, is objectively unambiguous, as in, by all of the evidence that is physically present within the game, there's currently depicted only one way to accomplish being an Empyrean, being the child of a single god. So that is patently wrong, in my opinion, and we've talked about that ad nauseum earlier. Why is TLGTW specifying currently depicted here? Because in the exact context where it is correct to state the woman in the Mona Lisa does not have feet is the same exact context from which the video states there are no other ways to be an Empyrean. Obviously, you do not need me to justify the conclusion that below the legs of the woman is the Mona Lisa. In the Mona Lisa, she would have had feet there, but as is apparent, they are not physically depicted in the painting itself. From this perspective, the only thing that exists past the edges of Mona Lisa are the walls of the Louvre. This exact same line is what's being used to separate what information this show can draw conclusions from and what information this show can't draw conclusions from. As referred to in the video itself, canon information that physically exists within the framework of that fiction. Sorry, I'm misreading all over the place. Let me hydrate real quick. All right. As referred to in the video itself, canon information that physically exists within the work of that fiction. Okay, so they just kind of like missed a word. Canon is information that physically exists within that work of fiction. And headcanon, information that exists, not physically, but mentally within the reader's head. Yeah, they're just using a lot of fragments. I don't feel like this is as much of a me problem as just like they didn't proofread a lot of this. So, with it also being noticed that since the meaning of canon comes from the meaning of word physical, on account something beyond physical having no automatic connection to the thing's value, something being canon will have no automatic connection to that thing's value either. For an example of this, all right, they're not really talking about anything here. These aren't really corrections. Yeah, they're just kind of doubling down. This isn't really a connection or correction. Okay. You remember reading this? She didn't engage with Crunchy's critique at all. Oh yeah, I didn't look to see if she responded. No, she just used the heart emoji. No, that's not Crunchy's one. Let me see. Crunchy. Oh, she does reply. Ooh, okay. So she doesn't believe there's any evidence in game that the greater will doesn't actually exist. So what was the Crunchy one about? Okay, two. Two is what I want to look at. Millennia's remembrance isn't the only point from which the first of the three basic facts come from. They'll review this in episode 2. Okay. And on Cell, Ronnie reveals that only she, Mick, and Melly were able to claim the title of Empyrean, and because they were able to claim that title, the Two Fingers selected them as potential successors to Queen Marika, as opposed to, for example, Godwyn, firstborn of the Golden Lineage, and unmistakably loyal to the Golden Order, but not an Empyrean, which is why he nor any other non-Empyrean was chosen as potential next vessel for the Elden Ring. I mean, Ronnie might not have given us the full story. He could have been an Empyrean, but maybe not, probably not. It doesn't really matter. Millennia's remembrance shows why Ronnie, Mikola, and Millennia were the only people to claim the title of Empyrean. If Millennia's remembrance was the only mention of what defines an Empyrean, you'd be right, but from Ronnie's conversations, we already learned that being an Empyrean is incredibly exclusive, and great pains were taken in the process of creating the twin prodigies after Ronnie. As such, in the context of the game, there is no ambiguity that being born of one god is specifically what defines an Empyrean. I mean, it's just like you're kind of digging a hole there, because then you have to redefine what the Glowmide Queen is. Maybe you want to like lean on the fact that it's only using hearsay to talk about the Glowmide Queen being an Empyrean. And of course, like Marika herself is declared an Empyrean. Melina has grace, so she's already a member of the royal family, a demigod. Further connections like Ronnie being willing to run an errand for her at the start of the game, and so on and so forth, are mentioned in the video, or why they're certain enough of Melina's Empyrean status that she mentioned that she's betting on it in the video itself. Okay. Yeah, I don't really think there's too much more reason to read this. I mean, they're open to criticism, they just disagree. But yeah, I don't feel like they're truly absorbing it. They're just stuck on the idea of extrapolating from a singular event, I suppose. Yeah, okay. So I'll be honest, I kind of don't really want to watch this video tomorrow, but if you guys want me to do it, I will do it. So let me know in the chat or in the video comments or the Discord if you want me to continue, and I definitely will, because this is kind of like entertainment for you guys, as well as me like looking into the lore of others. So feedback will be appreciated. Don't watch it tomorrow? Okay. So we got one no. We had like 2 or 3 yeses before. I'll figure it out. Yeah, that's kind of my biggest gripe with this video is that the memes are finished. Watch it. Wouldn't kill you if I didn't. Kolo says, do I have any advice for someone to make a lore video? That's a really good question. I would have a lot of advice for that. That is just not the best time for me to answer that right now. If you're on the Discord, feel free to ask in like the content creation channel, and I'll go into that. I've thought about making a video on that topic before, but I mean, it's a lot of work. I have other videos that I'm working on, like my stupid review for Final Fantasy 16, where I'm just like in revision hell with my script. Certainly, doing these streams has taken up a lot of time that I could have used for other stuff as well, but it's all good. It's fun of the experience. You want to bring up the Brothers Code video again? Because you really like their videos personally. Yeah. Tyler, if you will comment which video specifically you want me to react to, I will definitely add it to the list. I might not get to it immediately, but it'll be on there. The lore series in which we just ask the devs. I know, right? You want to avoid being mistaken and present arguments as easily to be understood as possible. All right, so if you just want to do that, it's a pretty specific thing. The first thing you need to do is give up. Because no matter how clear you make something, somebody is going to misinterpret it, and that's just kind of par for the course. But, I mean, I can give you more specific pointers, but generally you just need to work on making sure your conclusions are supported by evidence and managing expectations, where sometimes it can be beneficial to like make your conclusion before you present your evidences for it. Sometimes the opposite needs to be the case, and it's just like a case-by-case basis. The most important part is to say that like what comes from the games and whatnot is what you're drawing from, and like having those kind of visual references to go along with it can help a lot. The character text, all that stuff. And then being clear about what you think is your speculation, your supposition, and all that stuff. But yeah, that's really, really basic stuff. It's not super helpful, I know. So if you want more detailed info, just ask me on the Discord or maybe in the YouTube chat, and then I might remember to like look at it. Okay, so that'll pretty much be it for me for tonight. We probably won't go into the next video or the next stream watching this video again. I do think, yeah, okay, since I'm not going to watch the rest of the video, I'll give my kind of feedback here for now if TLGTW watches this. I honestly think this was a pretty good video for it being a channel's first video as far as like the editing and stuff goes. Obviously there's some rough patches, but I mean, that just kind of goes with learning, which I'm sure you've taken to heart already. So I won't beat like that point into the ground too much further. And the other thing that I'll say is you talk about canon lore, but throughout this stream, you may have noticed me point out like what I perceive to be quite a lot of issues with your claims here. And if I'm able to do that, I think your perception of the lore isn't quite as crystallized as you might think it to be. And so I think it would just be better to drop the pretenses of saying that what you're talking about is canon, because I think it's giving you the appearance of more authority than you have. And as soon as you get questioned on one thing, that literally gives us room to throw away everything else you say, no matter how correct it is. Just one little mistake and you shoot yourself in the foot. So I would recommend just being clear what you are extrapolating from the text, and being a little bit more clear is about like what your opinion is based on it. And obviously you might not think that it's an opinion-based thing, but others might disagree. So anyway, that's just kind of my direct feedback from here. I really liked the first part of the video, and then not so much like 20 minutes on, just because of like disagreements and interpretations and a little bit of the methodology there. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Do the cool YouTube algorithm stuff, like, comment, subscribe, become a channel member. Not really, although it would be cool. And take care. We will be going live again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope to see you then. Last Protagonist out.